Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 489. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of You Know.
How's it going, eh?
Joining us this episode is once again longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II, as he's going to be discussing with us his work on He-Man Thundercats, issue number 5. If you haven't heard one of these episodes before, Freddie is very candid on the process of creating it, some of the background details that we need to know about, how he got involved with the project, but also his art process. And I'm not from an artist background. I'm a fan who really enjoys comics. Freddie is always so great at bringing us along for the ride and the journey. So please make sure to join us. If you haven't read this book yet, it's available digitally. It's available at your local comic shops. Grab He-Man Thundercats issue number 5 and read it before joining us. We go pretty spoilery throughout the whole thing. Not just about this issue, but about the series in general. So please make sure to join us on this one. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network, the League of Comic Book Podcasts, and the InfiniteComics.com podcast partnership. Jim's out of town, but I'm going to give you a quick little opening ad for our sponsor, DCBService.com. This is the beginning of the month, and the beginning of the month is where they always turn over and start giving us the new deals. The deals are always up to 75% off. It's a great way to secure the comic product that you're looking for. They have comics, they have trades, they have hardcovers, they have statues, action figures, everything geek culture that you could possibly want is available for pre-order. And they're always at an amazing discount. They do have a digital link to Comixology and My Digital Comics. 5% of those purchases always go towards your DCB service order. So if you aren't linking those accounts, do it. It doesn't cost you anything more. I will tell you one thing you want to make sure to do, though, is if you're shopping with Comixology, make sure every time before you make a purchase, go to DCBService.com, click on that Comixology link, and make sure that you're logged into the DCB service portal. Once you've linked your Comixology account and gone through their portal, every time you go through their portal, those purchases add up for you. So make sure you're doing that piece. It's really important. Over at InStockTrades.com, you want to do a search for Freddie E. Williams II. And the nice part about doing a search for it, if you haven't checked out any of his work, it's a great way to check out the collected editions. I've been a fan of his work on Robin, Brain Boy, The Movement from DC. He's done work on The Flash. Freddie's been all over comics and done just amazing work. And I'm not going to do it justice going through that. But the nice part about podcasts in general and interviews and things like that, it's a great way to learn about other work that artists and writers have done. This is the way to connect to them and then seek out some things that you've never read before. He's one of my favorite artists, and I definitely wanted to shout out that you can find a lot of his work. Not all of it, but a lot of his work is available on InStockTrades.com at an amazing discount. So it's a great way to get caught up on things that you've never checked out before. So make sure to check out DCB Service and our sponsor, InStockTrades.com. Mr. Segulin, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the He-Man Thundercats crossover event. So if you haven't read these, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
And just a quick aside, I'm going to make this very, very quick. I apologize for the lateness of this episode. I'm currently going through classes for my principal licensure, and because of that, I'm currently on the end where I'm doing my internship, and it's required quite a bit of my time. So because of that, we're still keeping the podcast going. There's no, dropping the podcast or anything, so please don't worry about that. But I am going to ask our listening audience just for a little bit of patience. Sometimes there's going to be some delays between episodes because those projects have to be a priority for me right now. And we will be continuing to publish at least 3 podcast episodes a month. I'd like to get them up to 4. If at all possible, we'll do that. We are on the road to 500. We are going to be a little shy of we were trying to tie it in with our 11th year anniversary. It's not going to happen, mainly because of this commitment. But we're going to be this year not only having our 11th anniversary, we are going to be hitting episode 500 this year and continuing on with Raging Bullets. So thank you to our listening audience. Everyone's been very kind and supportive, and I just wanted to give a quick shout at the beginning of the episode about that. So without further ado, enough of our jibber jabber. Let us go ahead and talk to Freddie E. Williams II as we discuss He-Man Thundercats issue number 5.
Nothing like the handy-dandy electro claw for carving through metal doors.
We are very proud to once again have joining us longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II. We're actually going to be talking about issue 5 of He-Man Thundercats, written by Rob David and Lloyd Goldfine. Obviously drawn by Freddie E. Williams II, colored by Jeremy Cowell, lettered by Darren Bennett, cover by Freddie E. Williams II and Jeremy Cowell. And
It's Caldwell.
Caldwell?
Yeah.
Yes, as I'm pronouncing it horribly wrong. Associate editor Jessica Chen and editor Christy Quinn. I think about that. On the show, we always apologize after doing credits because we know we butcher everybody's names. But this one in particular, first of all, Freddie, welcome back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. As always, it's I'm looking forward to talking to you guys.
This is a book I really wanted to talk about. Jim and I talked about this briefly on an episode in the past, knowing that, you know, we're fortunate that we have a very good relationship with you, and you obviously are a show regular, part of our crazy cast. This one blew me away. I was talking to you briefly about this before the episode kicked on, and I talked about this on the show previously. Your artwork is something where I've been a fan. We met you because we were fans of your Robin run. And that was how I really got to wrap my head around your art sensibilities, your storytelling style. I've enjoyed following and watching your evolution. This one, because there's such a fantasy aspect of it, and there was a chance for you, I think, to play around with some tools and take them in new places that I haven't seen you do in a while, this really struck me as the artistic piece as just being a very beautiful book. Every page as I was going through it, I think just you and the color work, everything just kind of really meshed together into turning into something where I was, from the covers to straight on through the pages, I normally do my art read through very similar to how Jim and I always talk about on the show. My art read through is second. I kind of read the storyline first to get my head wrapped around it, then I really go through and appreciate the art. I did this one so the opposite because right from the first issue, I just was really blown away by the art. And I'm a fantasy fan, and it's funny how, you know, obviously this show is so much more focused on the superhero work, but I've really always grown up being a J.R.R. Tolkien fan, big fan of Terry Brooks. Fantasy in general, I'm not going to do enough service to the amount of fantasy that I really enjoy. So this piece, it's funny when you talk about He-Man and Thundercats, how much this took on a kind of a science fiction fantasy blending, but much more because of the castles and the sword play and all of that look. And it really was appropriate for these properties in a way that I was just blown away by this. So I'm really glad you're here because I just want to talk a lot about your process on this, how you kind of put this together, what your thinking was, because I really found this to be a very pretty book all the way through.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Both He-Man and Thundercats were both properties that I think all of us are pretty much, I mean, we're within the same age group and stuff. So He-Man and Thundercats, both of them were very popular, not exactly at the same time, but, you know, pretty close within about the same age, you know, whenever I was a kid. And I grew up in not super poor, but a relatively poor family. But one of the few like big toys that I got, because I didn't get any of the cool like Star Wars toys. I didn't have the Millennium Falcon or the AT-AT Walker or any of that stuff. But I did have both the Castle Grayskull and the Thundercats lair. Not like all the Thundercats or all the Masters of the Universe, but I had quite a few of the toys. I had like an accumulation of Skeletors by the time I was no longer a kid, and an accumulation of Scythes, and it was when this. I mean, I guess this is like a longer part, like how I got onto this gig or whatever. But just the excitement for me, the excitement of being able to be associated with this, it's been something I never thought that I would get to draw. You know, like whenever I was working in 2015, I was trying to do like a warm-up sketch every single day, and so I made this list, you know, of like all these different properties and characters that I wanted to draw, and I had like different themes for different months. And, you know, it was like right out of the gate, January was, you know, Ninja Turtles, He-Man, Thundercats, and then I had a few oddball, you know, The Watchmen was in there as well. So that's kind of out of that theme. But with, you know, Thundercats, He-Man, and Ninja Turtles, the reason I had them early is because this was an experiment for me to do a sketch every single day. And basically, if I ended up faltering later, I wanted to have at least had the chance to draw some of my favorite properties. And it's it feels only in retrospect oddly prophetic or something that I've now had a chance to since then work on all three of those. I drew them in that same month, but it's not like I ever thought that they would get to mix together. Of course, when I played with them as a kid, I mixed them together all the time, even though they were a little off scale. But it's just, I'm super kind of like surprised that the book even happened, and then like almost in disbelief, even though I just finished the series, drawing the series, that I got the chance to illustrate it. It's weird.
One of the things for anybody out here listening who maybe you didn't grow up with He-Man and Thundercats, I really enjoyed from the series. I was a He-Man fan first because I ended up getting a He-Man action figure. It was a random, because I think it was a toy line before the animated show, if I remember correctly. But I remember getting a He-Man action figure, starting to enjoy the cartoon. I remember Thundercats when it was on. I jumped on Thundercats late, but then found myself really enjoying that property. The thing I loved about this miniseries was not only was it a nice nostalgia piece for those of us that grew up with both, but I also found, like, in the beginning of it, it really introduced you to the characters in a way where it didn't overdo it. It gave you everything you needed to be a part of this story. It gave you the nice refresher if you were a fan who was like, oh, yeah, now I remember. I'm kind of on board and ready to go. And I would not hesitate to hand this to anybody who'd never touched the properties to be able to say, hey, this is a great way to learn about both and kind of get your feet wet in the whole thing and just have a fun ride in a nice contained miniseries. So I thought that was really well done in how the series was crafted, that it gave you the meat and potatoes of the action. I liked that the narrative was focused on different characters. The narrator in each issue is somebody different. And you kind of figure out by the end of the issue, in some cases, who it actually was that was doing the talking. I liked that vehicle of story delivery in this because I felt like each issue had its own thing going on, even though it was one big overarching story that I loved. I liked that the perspective kind of shifted each issue, which I thought was a lot of fun as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting concept to use as a shifting narrator throughout the series. That is a pretty cool idea.
And I've been going nuts, so we got to do this. Thundercats! Oh! I've been going crazy over here. Like, come on!
Yeah, not too bad. The voice actor, I don't know his name, but actually the way that you just said the ho part didn't sound too far off. So pretty good.
Hey man, I was a huge fan of both of these series on the cartoon as well as the figures and whatnot. But that was something that I absolutely loved about this, in that this was a maturing of the stories that were told, because when they were the cartoon, they had to be very, it was very G-rated, and here we're seeing some blood. We're seeing some damage being done, and I'm like, man, this is cool. And the villains in this are coming across more actual real threats, whereas in the cartoon they always were really dopey. And even as a kid I was like, man, I could take that dude, so here we're getting some pretty good nastiness, and I absolutely love that. But I haven't lost a single look, feel, or any of that I still had from the TV shows. I still haven't lost that same little kid that was watching those cartoons is now reading this book and seeing the same thing. It's matured right along with me, and that is something that I got to give just full props to the full art team on this one, because this is a paper visual medium that is completely reminding me of a fluid motion cartoon, and that's something that, man, dude, this is one of those I was like, wow, this is awesome.
Awesome, thank you. Jeremy Caldwell is the colorist. He's also a big fan of both properties, so we had a few conversations beforehand, and we worked together on sort of the look of things, because we wanted it, we didn't want it to go completely into we wanted to have a mix of it being still the cartoon, but also, a little bit more gritty or darker or realistic, but we didn't want it to go too far in either direction. It was back whenever I was on a panel at San Diego Con, I remember the moderator could do a really good Skeletor impression, voice impression, and he did it a few times off and on, and it's, there's a lot of times where Skeletor was basically played for laughs. I mean, same thing with Mumra, but these villains have the potential, and I hope, we were trying to exploit them being genuinely creepy and trying to make them feel like they're formidable threats. And not everything has to be realistic to the nth degree, but you hope to find some sort of a medium in there where it's a raising of the stakes so that it feels a little bit more dire and interesting, while still hopefully the characters don't change so far that they become unrecognizable.
Oh no, I was just gonna go along with that, because that is the thing that really did impress me on what you guys did artistically, in that we really did get these same characters, these same feel, but as you said, just a little bit grittier, a little bit more real. Like the Lion-O last issue or this issue? Yeah, the last issue where the Lion-O versus He-Man fight. When he was in the actually it was this issue.
That was issue 4. That was
last issue.
Yeah.
That was a great fight, in that you're seeing, as I said, a little bit grittier, but you still had those moments where, especially when He-Man finally snaps out of it and the Sword of Omen stops Lionel from hitting him. And I love the look on He-Man's face. You saw that same He-Man, and then you saw Lionel. Oh, okay. It was a great. It went right from that very hard hitting battle where these two are hitting each other with massive tombs and whatnot. And I was like, man, this is and again, on paper, but I was still seeing the fluid motion, and just the way you use that full page to kind of tell the full story was just wonderful. Then, bam, you get that moment back. I'm like, that was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Question though.
Yeah.
When you're looking at, did you approach this one different than, say, like you did with the Robins and the other superhero? Because of that, there was this physical, this animated medium that was initially first, and now we have this paper. Did you look at different techniques or kind of change how you were doing layouts on the page to keep that going, or?
There's definitely a different approach if you were to compare it to Robin, which was several years ago. But the main difference, it's less because I was trying to. It's less that it had anything to do with the cartoon or the fact that these were animated or anything like that, and it's more to do with just my artistic preferences throughout the years and stuff, and me trying stylistically just doing different things. So if you have back whenever I was working on Robin, things were very clean and simplistic. Part of that was just my artistic sensibilities at the time, but it was also because it kind of fits the youthful nature of it being a Robin book. But then over time, I'm working on other books, and so I'm exploring other different rendering type of styles. And the typical way that comic books are rendered is like if you were to take a ballpoint pen that only drew in black, and then you drew like a bunch of lines side by side, and it's like the closer the lines are together, it makes like a darker value, but the further apart, it makes almost like a gray value if you hold the paper away from you. That's called hatching or cross hatching. I know you guys know this, but I'm expressing that for anyone who might not know it. That's like a traditional pen and ink illustration technique. But then and that used to be total necessity of printing the sort of the black plate whenever they're printing CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and then black. And the black was the most dominant one. It was the line art. And in the old days, many years ago when comic books were first coming out or something, they were not able to, the printing presses were not able to print gray as well. They had to, you had to be very careful that you were only using black lines. Anyway, the point is that with much more modern printing techniques, now you can do a bunch of very subtle stuff. Very subtle textures are still printed very clearly because the printing is so good. So now we can work in shades of gray. So not every artist does that. A lot of them stay in the pen and ink sort of world. But I've been working the last year and a half now in what's called ink wash, which is instead, you take that same black ink and you dilute it with some water, and then you get different shades of gray. And it kind of, whenever you layer them on top of each other, and depending on the type of paper, it looks a little bit like watercolor if the only color you're using is black from the watercolor paint set or something. And that's what I've been, and then on top of that, I use a bunch of marker rendering and pencil rendering and stuff. I'm bringing all that up because it all is it's instrumental, it's foundational for the look of the book. So normally whenever you look at the very clean line art for like a much more traditionally illustrated comic book, whenever it's scanned in, then all of the texture and molding to make like highlights and then shadows beyond what's kind of indicated in the black and white line art is all done in the computer. Like the computer colorist adds all those gradations and stuff. Whereas with how I've been working on Batman Ninja Turtles and now He-Man Thundercats, I'm adding probably more than 70 to 80% of what would be normally the colorist sort of modeling of shadows and highlights. I'm doing that now in gray values. So it's much more laborious. It's a very time-consuming process. And in a way, it's like I'm doing part of the colorist job, but it also makes the colorist job harder to then for Jeremy to match his rendering into that organic feel. It actually makes the job much harder for both of us. So why do it? But it's just because, that's been just my sort of natural artistic evolution. That was kind of how I was trying to do things first it was on commissions and then on covers. And then eventually I wanted to execute it on an entire comic. And anyway, so yeah, the sort of the look of this is a molding of like several different directions. It's like trying to keep in mind what the characters felt like. Like you want to draw a distinction, like Lino in general is going to be smaller and thinner than He-Man. He has bigger eyes. So like that goes into that's like more of a structural or an anatomy sort of feel. And then all the rendering stuff is more from an artistic sort of evolution standpoint. But then, sometimes with the panel work, there are some artists who have sort of almost like graffiti-esque, hip-hop-esque influence in their style, where they do like oddly shaped panels that might look triangular or circular panel shapes, like a character's like half their body is sticking out of every panel, where even if people are just talking, half their head is sticking out, or half of their finger, if they're pointing to make a gesture, is sticking out of the panel. And it feels like all their hands are really big because it's like the graffiti art sort of influence, and it looks really cool for that style. But there's the disadvantage of that is that it's almost like if you were playing music visually to connect, like the louder you get in music, you make an emphasis or you make a crescendo or something. So that's in music, that's sound. But visually, the way that you make a crescendo or make something loud is by having it pop out of the panel or have it be bigger than other elements to exaggerate it and have it stand out in juxtaposition and contrast. If you apply that sort of exclamation point over and over, eventually it starts to lose its emphasis. It's like everything is loud, so nothing seems loud. So where I'm going with that is my storytelling is I'm purposely keeping it conventional on a lot of the pages, where I'm not doing oddly shaped panels until I really need to hit the exclamation point and then make something really stand out by going unconventional in those moments. So like in issue 4, whenever Cringer becomes a character who we don't actually name the name of, his name is either Bravor or Battle Cat Man, we never actually decided, but he becomes like this Cringer, which is He-Man's cat and normally cowardly friend, is basically imbued with the power of the Thundercats. So he becomes this like humanoid version of Battle Cat kind of. And those panels are just all really weird. The panel layouts, I mean. So they're no longer square, whereas almost every other panel in the whole book, they are. But hopefully that means that the savage nature of his attack on the mutants, on the bad guys that are in a different part of the pyramid, it'll make that moment stand out. Or whenever, right now I'm drawing a blank, but if something else very dramatic happens and me as a visual storyteller, one of the tricks is to now start making something really stand outside of the panel border, or to the rendering style really change so that it creates something that's different, and then it stands out because of that, and so it gives you a different effect. All of those things you kind of learn that as storytelling tricks over the years, but ahead of time I have to decide that. I remember, reading about Todd McFarlane, he said that he would oftentimes make if there's going to be a double page spread of this big moment on, like, let's say pages 8 and 9 or something, then he would intentionally make the page or the 2 pages before it, he would intentionally make them a little more boring so that the reader's eye would get used to this more slow sort of de-emphasized storytelling, that when you turn the page, it's like, whoa, like it really hit him over the head. It's things you have to think of ahead of time, because if I'm wasting that sort of ammunition early in the book, like where they're just sitting around talking or something, but I'm having all these extreme angles and the storytelling weirdness happening, then I'm kind of wasting my ammunition. Anyway, those are all some of the thoughts that go into the look of the book.
I'm so glad you brought up from the last issue the Cringer, the Cringer in Thundercats mode, as that's what I was calling him, because we were going to talk about that today, because I absolutely love that. That was one of those moments, again, that last issue, there was so many moments where I was cheering and hooping and hollering, and that was one of the moments where when I saw him come flying out, I was like, yeah! Because, again, it was funny because Cringer was one of those characters I was always like, as a kid, I was like, okay. I thought Battle Cat was cool, obviously.
Yeah,
but Cringer, I was like, but just seeing that one, I was like, man, again, I was the little kid sitting in front of the TV cheering, and especially because it wasn't just Battle Cat, it was Battle Cat Thundercats mode, and you had a great metamorphosis between the two of them, just a nice merging, and you get some parts here, some parts there. I was like, oh, that looks awesome. I was like, and immediately I'm like, again, I was that little kid cheering in front of the TV, and just throughout that whole battle sequence, especially when you get every time he's using the Sword of Omens, those were always throughout this whole series, using the Sword of Omens, just you really brought in, especially the Sight Beyond Sight, because I always thought that was another cool one, and the way you pull that out and you just bam. It was a very powerful upfront image of the sword, and then you see the vision outside it. And that, again, I love how you do that layering thing when you're doing with these multiple, you can see the multiple steps on top of each other, and it all merges together into this one massive, awesome looking picture. That's one of the things about your artwork that I absolutely always gush about.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Creating a collage type image like that, like the Sight Beyond Sight for He-Man to take a look at, that's another, if you use this sort of collage feel, it's another weapon that you don't want to waste on something that's small. I mean, that's like probably the biggest moment in the book, probably the biggest emotionally or something like that, or should be. And so you want to save it for that type of thing. So for example, if I was just doing a collage in the middle of the fight or something, I think it would have weakened the effect of the large collage for the Sight Beyond Sight. So if I'm doing my job well ahead of time while I'm reading the script and stuff, it's like I see multiple options of which the different directions I could go in for storytelling, like different angles in my mind or different storytelling sort of grids for the page and stuff. I have to contextualize in my mind the entire issue as one thing, one piece of art or something, and then to know where I need to draw the exclamation point, so to speak. And then you start to break that down then by the scene and then by the page, and then even sort of in the panels, like what is the most important thing to focus on or something. So that's why it's very difficult to do those, at least it is for me, to lay out pages or to lay out a whole book at once. And the whole like 6 or 7 days that it takes me to lay out an issue, I'm usually like a distracted, slightly depressed, kind of unpleasant person to be around, because it takes up like all of my sub-processors, in my mind. And so if Kiki, my wife, is trying to talk to me, it's like I'm kind of in a different world. Like I'm not even totally in the moment at that time. So it's like it takes all of my concentration.
As I was looking over this book, one of the things that I really enjoyed about it, as you were talking about the artwork and kind of how you were laying it out, I really liked the amount of detail in this. And I kept, as I was looking through it, just knowing from past experience of your process and what certain pages mean to you as you go through. I'm looking at issue 5, and I'm looking at, first of all, obviously the cover. And you see Skeletor and Mumra hanging over Castle Grayskull and the amount of depth of detail there. But even as you're paging through the first few pages, we see these gorgeous landscapes. And they were really essential to me, because one of the things I really like about the way television and media and toy properties and things like that we grew up with are being handled now, the best ones to me are the ones where they capture the essence of what really drew us to those properties to begin with. But also keep in mind that we have grown. And there's a maturity in the property, that there's a storytelling depth that is beyond what the original animated or comic or even the toy story that was going along with it originally belied. But as you look into this, you start to see there's just more depth, there's more danger, there's more action, there's more character exploration in this. I think the relationship between He-Man and his father, for example, Lion-O and his whole crew, these are all things that we did see in the animated series, yes. And I loved all those things, but I felt like there was like they have grown along with me without growing to the point like that there's a maturity for just the sake of having that. You know, we didn't start having random swearing thrown in there for no reason. I don't want to see the M-rated Thundercats or He-Man, but I do feel like there is a story maturity that appeals to the audience that grew up with them. I wouldn't hesitate to give this to a child or, you know, a kid growing up or that type of thing and saying, hey, this is really cool. You might really like this because it's very contemporary. But at the same time, it does hit that nostalgia piece for me that I love. I feel the ones that are getting it right are doing this kind of thing. Where it's coming into a question for you, and in that piece, I'm looking at this artwork and the amount of detail you're putting into this. What were you doing to yourself? Because I'm looking at, like, it's not just the pages with, like, double-page spreads. I'm looking at, as originally I said, you know, the pieces where you're establishing kind of a sense of the worlds that we're looking at. But then you see the double page of the battles. But every single page after that, the background detail, the foregrounds of what's going on. I know, you know, you've talked over the years about some of the tricks that you use because of the fact that you're on deadlines and things like that too. You know, you do establishing shots and you move on to pieces like that. Yeah. This was filled with so much depth and detail all the way through. I don't know how you kept up with it all. I loved this book for its visual presentation and really appreciated what clearly was a sheer amount of care. Did you have normal deadlines on this? How did this work for you? Because I'm in awe of the amount of detail in these pages. So I guess that's really where my question's coming from, because I don't know what you were thinking. Because I appreciated it as a fan because of what you did.
Well, thank you. The deadline, like, you know, whenever I was drawing a book like Robin, I would sometimes draw it. The fastest I ever drew an issue was probably 2.5 weeks or something. There's no chance I could have done that with this level of complexity or something, because that would have been, going back to the Robin issue, it would have been like Robin fighting one person on a rooftop. And so it's every single thing that I just said, it's one character versus another character in a controlled environment where once you've established it once or twice, then you can almost like start ignoring the background and just focus on the action and stuff. So it becomes like very simple. But then the difference between telling a story inside of an elevator, which would be the Robin issue, versus telling a story in like a football stadium, which is, or even bigger than that, you know, like a Civil War battlefield or something. Each of the He-Man Thundercats issues that I've been drawing, instead of the 2.5 week sort of turnaround, a normal book, again, like the Robin level, might be like a 4-week turnaround, might be like the typical sort of a deadline you'd have to draw 22 pages plus a cover, so 23 pages. For the more detailed artwork, though, that adds a level of complexity and a lot more time, and then the sort of scope of this adds more complexity. So each of these issues I've had 5 weeks to 5.5 weeks. But what hit on, so issue 4, though, most of that issue of He-Man Thundercats took place within Mumra's tomb. So there was like a couple of very busy pages, for example, at the beginning of the book, where they're basically recapping the past events, where the ancient spirits of evil are now manifest and they're creating a swath of destruction through Eternia, headed towards Castle Grayskull. Like that, those are busy pages. And then whenever we're inside the control room, it's busy pages because there's like 8 panels on the page and there's like 9,000 characters that I have to draw talking, and they each have to have room for the dialogue. But then the rest of issue 4 wasn't that bad. Well, I had the same amount of time to draw that issue, to draw issue 4, that I did to draw issue 5. But I actually had slightly less time on issue 5 because it butted up against all of the holidays. So the beginning of issue 5 was like right at Thanksgiving, and then I finished issue 5 right before New Year's. So imagine just your daily life, or your daily sort of, I shouldn't say daily, but your yearly routine when it comes to holidays. You've got all of these family obligations that come up. Now, we don't have kids, but we do have Kiki, my wife. She has her dad's and her mom's side, and then I have my mom's side, or whatever. Now it's my sister's side because my mom passed away. But the point, though, and then we have a a family, a friend sort of event that we always do for both Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it just stacked up on top of each other where it was like, super complex composition, super complex rendering, and then a compressed time frame. So the way that I did that was to get very, very little sleep, relying as much as I could on Kiki, who is my, business partner and full-time art assistant. She helped me a lot as far as filling in, like I would, basically an area that's like, just needs to be filled in black. It needs to be this big black shadow. I could basically just outline it, put an X there, and then Kiki would help me fill it in later. She helped me a lot in the ink wash with a lot of the smoke effects. Like if there was like billowing smoke and stuff, I basically demonstrated to her a few times what I was doing, like the technique of layering ink wash on top of each other to create a certain effect. And then she did the smoke on almost every other page. It was wherever I could delegate it to her, I would. And then every moment you're awake, it's a mistake if you're not drawing. Basically that's what it was. So for the vehicles, because there was a lot of them that are complex and stuff, I hired a couple of freelance 3D model artists who created like the Wind Raiders. So they would create it and I would use it essentially like if I had a toy, that I could just look at the odd geometry from different angles and then still draw it, but using that as... Because whenever I was looking at reference, especially for like the attack track and for the Wind Raider and for what's the other one? The Sky Sled, which is what Tila and Chitara were on. Those have very complex geometry that if you're just drawing it from your own mind, it's totally possible. And I have done that with plenty of other vehicles. But if you're drawing a whole fleet of them, or if you're drawing them over and over and over and over, in a lot of different panels, it really helps to have either a toy or a 3D model, or have like somebody who's taken you, 20 or 30 photos or something of it. And so I just went the 3D model route. Anyway, that's basically the best I could do as far as sort of outsourcing or delegating work to other people, and then you just spend a lot of time on it.
I'm looking at on page 4, that big double page spread, with, again, it has the fall of Grayskull, and you got the king there, and there's all this massive energy and this massive stuff going on with this fight sequence going on. It is funny because I've got my regular read through, my art read through, then my next read through, then I've got especially with one of the things I like to do with your stuff is I'll sit there and I just pinpoint, I just look at every little, I kind of do a secondary art read through where I'm just going to kind of studying more or less, and instead of just reading, where I kind of go from one page over to sweep over to the other and just look through it very minute, seeing what kind of little details I can detect that I missed in all my previous read-throughs. And on this page, it was Snarf that I loved how you put him in there, because all my other read-throughs completely missed him. Then I'm like, oh, there he is! This little bit right there hidden among the rocks, dude. That's the kind of stuff that I'm like, makes it fun to reread your books, is those little details you put in there.
Thank you. It's one of the, to go back to the previous question that Sean just asked about, like, what was I doing to myself? Like, and it's relevant to what you just said. It's like Snarf, basically every single character that's there needed to be established. And so it's like there are storytelling tricks you can use to cheat when you're under deadline. And I've had to use them. I think most comic book artists do, and if they're done well and they're done sparingly, no one ever notices. You've just saved yourself 6 hours of time. One of the caveats, or one of the qualifiers maybe, that need to be in place for that to happen is, imagine you have to draw a panel that is like in the foreground, a kid is doing this and that, and you need to see, and like, but his parent who's across the street has to have a speaking line. But then in the background, there's like an airplane flying in the sky. But there's a guy on the airplane who's reading a newspaper. And then you need to see the headline of the newspaper, too. It's like, if you keep adding, if the script calls for that, I mean, in that example, if it were me, I'd just break it down into a bunch of different panels, of course, or maybe a montage or something like that. But what I just described to you was actually just one panel on a page that has like 12 panels on it or something, and almost every panel is like that. And there's like speaking lines for people who basically, they're not doing an action. It's like there's an action that's happening by one guy or, two people or whatever, but then the speaking line is happening somewhere in the background from another person, it kind of forces your hand where I'm less and less able to use those storytelling tricks. And so instead, you're just buckle up and hunker down and just draw for 15 or 18 hours that day and every day until it's done, because there's fewer ways for you to cheat. And then once you've established, it also becomes like, at least for me, like a matter of like, I'm not going to let this page beat me, or this issue beat me, or this double page spread or whatever. For issue 5, that double page spread, which is pages 2 and 3, the Fall of Grayskull thing, and then pages like 22 and 3, which is towards the end after basically the ancient spirits of evil have seemingly been defeated and stuff. They're very complex double page spreads, and I decided, basically when I start rationing out pages for the month, or after I've basically done the structure drawing, now I'm about to move into inking, so I start kind of pairing them up, like this week I need to get X number of pages done, so I'll pair the most complex with the least complex pages, so that I'm kind of balancing out my workload and not just doing all the complex stuff, because then it becomes like this quagmire. Well, this issue really didn't have many. It was just almost every page was complex, But I decided to do those double page spreads. I worked on them in the same chunk of days. It was, at a time where, I mean, holy crap. I kept, like, Kiki was helping her aunt at a bakery, at the bakery that they own, and so she wasn't here. And I kept texting her, like, photos of the progress of it, and some of it would be like, I've been working for 3 hours, and this is how much I have done. Or after however many hours of doing this, like, this is what I'm texting to Kiki. I'm thinking to myself, what have I gotten myself into? It's like you kind of have... You're like, okay, I'll just dive in. But then after a few hours, you back up and you're like kind of stretching your neck. And you're like, that's all I've gotten done? It really, I don't know. It's the most complex issue I've ever drawn. It's just a big, giant war battle scene that has characters of different scales. So you have to pose it the compositions have to be a certain way. You can't, if it was like they were fighting a bunch of only 12-foot tall villains, then the compositions could actually be a little closer every once in a while. It would be like if you were watching Lord of the Rings, you can do the big established shot of the army and then you cut into all these close-ups. But instead, it's like these 100-foot tall villains. So, oh man, it was tough. Like, I'm not trying to like pat myself on the back. What I'm just saying is, like, I barely made it through that, and on the other side of it, it feels good that I made it through, but wow, it was hard.
I say you can pat yourself on the back, dude, honestly, because, again, it's funny you talk about the more in-depth than, or it's like I can't find a single page that doesn't have the in-depth magnitude, whether it's massive fleets or whether you get some really cool zoom-in close-ups on some great facial expressions, or even just, them simply mounting that cannon to the cat tank. That couple panels could have been a very simple, easy done, but you look at the details you're going into with actually making this cannon that could possibly be realistic on top of this other giant tank type thing that could possibly be realistic. And it's weird talking about these cat people saying, yeah, I can see that being realistic. It's the same kind of comments we have when we talk about Superman being realistic, but you put that in there and you gave us enough that there is a suspension of disbelief, there is a believability, because there is this emotion, there is that type of the story isn't just the actual words being told, but it is such you guys did such a great combination of the words being told, but also just this visual treat.
Thank you. Thanks. And then visually, whenever I'm rendering things, because I've established a certain style, which is, to not shy away from the rendering and to do as much as I can in the black and white until, to borrow a phrase from Adi Granov, who, he says that, he does as much as he uses almost entirely pencil to do rendering, but he says, he renders on paper until a point of diminishing returns. And that just means where essentially it's going to be... I've done basically all I can do on the paper, and now it's time to just call it done. And it's easier to do that when it's a close-up of someone's face. Or if you pull back a little bit, it's like 5 or 6 torso shots. Or if you pull back a little bit more, it's like a a team shot of 7 or 8 full figures. But then when you get into that double page spread on 2 and 3, or later on in 22-23, I could start cheating it and simplifying stuff to the point where maybe no one could blame me or no one could really tell, but it's almost like it's inconsistent and I can't have the inconsistency, so I need to stick to my guns and execute it with as much rendering there. So instead of it being like a bunch of big fat brush lines doing the rendering, now I've got to use not even like a 0.5 pencil, but a 0.3 pencil, no joke. And I'm using a 0.3 pencil on those little bitty figures in the background to give them molding and a certain texture that will draw contrast to the foreground texture. The foreground texture has bigger, blockier, bolder sort of things, and then that background stuff looks more sketchy, which makes it recede in space. Dude, it's like I could talk about it for a very long time because I had so long that I was working on it that I had to keep justifying it to myself. So it's almost like I had to have this conversation with myself, like a pep talk to keep me going on it. Ugh. Oh my God, what have I done? Like, that's what it keeps feeling like. But, afterwards, it's like, it's fun to have accomplished it. So
this isn't a Batman and Superman team up. And I don't mean that to diminish that type of thing. I think what ends up happening is because of the fact that you're blending two worlds together, this is more of, really, I guess the way to say it, it's two superhero teams teaming up in the way that it's laid out. So you have to give screen time to so many characters. And it's not enough that you're bringing in people from one world and having them all interact with each other so you get to see them all. You want the payoff of people from both worlds getting to know each other and learn about each other and maybe seeing those characters from a new angle. And I'm looking at like Man of Arms teaming up with the Thundercats. They originally think that, these people from Eternia are so low tech, they're almost primitive in their technology. I kind of equate it to Star Trek and Star Wars, where Star Wars always looks like everything's a little bit older. Star Trek, everything is clean and more futuristic. You look at these two worlds and it's the same thing. There's that kind of disparity between them, and I think it makes it interesting that there's something more learned in the relationships with them as they team up. I really liked that, but where as an artist it plays off onto you, you have to decide how to render those sequences and how to give them, each one of them, because those might be the favorite characters of any particular reader on this. You want to give them equal value and screen time and make those moments something special. And I really enjoyed that part of it because each page as I was turning through, you were seeing this character development that was going on that could have been flat. It could have been something where storytelling-wise, you could have just had the cool part. Look, they're teaming up. Yay, that's cool. It would have been, to me, a great geek-out event, but it wouldn't have had the same impact on me that this does. As I'm reading through it and watching what's happening with these characters, because it was done to such detail, and really you got to see character growth throughout all this. I'm like, man, this is exactly what I want from this type of thing. I want to be blown away. I don't want to just go, man, that was cool. I want to go, that surpassed my expectations. That made me go, I'm a fan of He-Man and Thundercats. Now I'm more so. And that's what I liked about this is those sequences really made me just go, wow, all the way through. I'm watching... We see the air support sequences where you're seeing very different ideologies on how we go into combat. One is up close and personal. The other's doing it with her army. And through their own situations, that they're learning respect for each other's fighting styles and their own military fighting philosophies. And I loved those sequences because each action sequence was so beautiful because you're dealing with huge beasts and great combat along with, again, the character drama. And you get to see an emotional exchange all the way through, from determination to surprise to friendship developed all the way through, that just take you through this like cool emotional journey that is dialogue and visual married together in a way that just really, it's what I find satisfying about this medium.
That's what our goal was. So if we hit that, then that's awesome, and thank you. That's what we would want to happen kind of on our best day. That's the best case scenario of how we would want it to be received.
Did you have a favorite character that you were drawing on this one?
Let's see. Panthros visually, Panthro and Tigra are my most, I don't know, the Thundercats that I enjoy drawing the most. So I luckily got to draw them a lot. I really enjoy drawing Man-at-Arms. I think there's basically a similarity sort of in like the boldness of the anatomy or the structure or something between Panthro and Man-at-Arms. I gravitate towards drawing that sort of character. So those are probably my favorite parts to draw. But for some reason, I really like Rio Blast. He's the master of the universe that has, he kind of looks a little bit Texas-ish and has two big cannons on his back. He's only in a couple of panels, but he's the one on the double page spread 2 and 3. He's the one who's kind of in the middle and he's pointing up. It's not like he's really commanding anything, but he's kind of like saying, in case anyone missed it, the bad guys are over there. That should be his line. No. But for some reason, he's really fun to draw. The kind of goofy little sketch between Orko and Snarf was pretty fun to draw. Sometimes you get moments, but as far as specific characters, it's, Man-at-Arms and Panthro probably were my two favorite.
Those were probably some of the cooler characters. Those were probably, consistently the two cooler characters in the shows. So, because they always had those moments where, each one of them had that, that gut check moment kind of, story, the strong, leader kind of, that squadron leader that you depend on. So I can see a similarities and all that between them.
Yeah.
Do you find when you're shifting between like magic characters from those type of characters, because the magic characters seem to have a different visual flow to them, and I really liked the way that those characters were rendered as well. How do you get yourself, because you just mentioned what you really like about drawing some of your favorites, when you go to these magic characters that aren't that kind of visual flow, there's a lot more angles to them, and some of that is by design to kind of give off this sense of what magic does to you, or how, magic comes from inside you in a very different way. How do you make that shift as an artist? Is it hard to kind of get your hand going, okay, now we're drawing this way versus that? Is that transition difficult for you? Do you enjoy that? What does that look like? Because I'm not from an art background. I look at it, though, and I can really appreciate, like, this is a very different sort of character to draw who feels right in this world.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, if there was probably an underlying feel is to try to make gravity not affect them the same way. I mean, so it's more like Jaga or the Sorceress or something would be more flowy in nature. That might be the easiest way to summarize it. But then aside from that, there's the different types of poses, like the physicality of a character who's more about punching someone in the face is very different than somebody who has like distance powers or something like long range weapons. So that might be a difference visually as well. Each time it's like you're thinking of like a power signature for that character. It needs to be a little different so that not everyone looks like they're using the same power or equipment or something, like, or the blast of the cannon doesn't look the same as the magic energy that Orko might fire or something like that. So yeah, if like I was drawing every single character in like the Marvel universe or the DC universe, eventually you'd have to start repeating power signatures and stuff. But if it's in a book that, even if there's a lot going on, like in this issue, you just try to keep rendering different surfaces and then energy effects, try to keep them a little different so that you can, there's as much visual distinctiveness as possible.
I liked how great the lore's blended together between these two worlds. And even our villains, I'm looking at the Buzz and Woody surprisingly, the Buzz and Woody of this story, which winds up being Skeletor and Mumra as they pop into the scene.
I would never have thought of it like that. That's really funny.
I love that because in issue 4, like the two of them all said, like, let's be buddies. And I'm making light of it. I actually found it to be one of my favorite moments because I'm like, they start off as adversarial, and naturally, because of the nature of their motivations, it's the quest for power. So taking power from somebody else who is on a similar quest would obviously be like your Highlander moment of, I've got your power, now I'm more powerful. But recognizing now, okay, we've got our mutual enemies teaming up. And because of that, we're being thwarted from our overall goal. let's team up and make this work, and they start to see a benefit in each other as they go through. Now, not having read issue 6 yet, who knows where that's going to go. I actually like that I see these two as being the villains that they are, so who knows where that piece is going to pay off for the two of them. But I really enjoy seeing them together and the way they pop in, and the way that in a 5-issue series, their relationship has evolved from one really taking down the other in surprise moments that I didn't expect, where Skeletor took down Mumra, but then all of a sudden them turning around and finding value and benefit to each other, in the case that what we're seeing in this issue 5 in particular, the war and the battle that's going on, is really driven heavily by the partnership that is formed between these two, that I really like, because they look great together, especially from the cover, then straight on through when they pop in.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that it's kind of out of necessity. It's like, at this point in the series, the only way for either of them to hit their objective, which does overlap, which is like the quest for power or something, is they have to work together, because if not, they're just going to waste all their energy basically fighting each other. They're just going to expend all of their energy wrestling around. So, but yeah, they're the type of characters, visually they work really well together, and then even the background with the ancient spirits of evil and how that all connects, like Jaga finding out about the connection from Thundera and stuff like that with, I don't know, basically he's using like a Thundercats character, Jaga, is using the Golden Discs of Knowledge, which is a Masters of the Universe thing, to give him additional knowledge of how to defeat the ancient spirits of evil. It's just neat how not all of the history blends together seamlessly, but I do think that Lloyd and Rob did a good job with trying to blend things together in a way that makes it feel pretty cohesive. I know that not everyone's a fan of that, because it doesn't exactly adhere to maybe previous continuity, but from my perspective, who I do not have an encyclopedic knowledge of both canons or something, it works. It seems like it makes sense, and that's all I need for me. I'm looking for a reason to give me an in quotes an in into the story, and that's enough for me to then go, okay, it makes sense, and then to move forward from that.
Because with the canon of the two universes, it's been how many years since I've last watched the cartoon, and I was immediately pulled back into the story. And as this stuff is laid out, I'm like, yeah, even though I didn't remember different stuff, it fit and made perfect sense. And I think that's something that this story from the beginning through has done a great job with, just keeping, making sense to this universe, but also if you weren't aware of this. So if you've never read a He-Man Thundercats, you could pick up this series and you could read it, and you would get a really cool story from it. Cool story, but also cool visual stuff. So you would get the full picture from this. I think that for me has been something that, has done, a real service to these two universes, and, just kudos to everybody involved in this, because this isn't just, as I said, this isn't just the story being told. This is, the actual words and whatnot, but, the script, this is also the visual story being told. So you guys worked so well together on this one. Again, I love when I see my art teams and the writing teams, just, you could tell you guys, you worked well together. And it was like, man, this is awesome combo.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the ideal audience probably are people in, like, the way you just described your own understanding, that you were fans of these properties or these series when you were younger, but you haven't read up on it, and become like encyclopedically engrossed in it. It's similar, I think, to if I'm watching a Superman movie, suddenly Brainiac's there, but like if I were to read the comic books and knew it encyclopedically, I would think, well, technically Brainiac didn't appear until after these other things had happened in the continuity, and so somehow it takes me out of the movie. I'm not saying that that's a wrong reaction. That's fine. Everyone has their own reaction or whatever, but it's my opinion that there's certain concessions. Not every ingredient has to be added in the exact same order, but as long as the cake tastes good, then hopefully you're good, but everyone's taste is different. So for me, as long as the ingredients are in there, because like there's stuff like if you were to look at like strict continuity things about like even the vehicles, like the Thunderstrike, I guess like shouldn't have been. It's like if you were to if you were to compare some of the character traits of even Lion-O, where he's at mentally with the rest of the team of the Thundercats, he should have been past the point where he's trying to prove himself as kind of like a young leader and stuff by the time they get the Thunderstrike. So I think that's a legitimate concern or legitimate issue for some people to have if that kind of thing bothers them. But that kind of thing doesn't bother me. It's more about those ingredients. It's almost like kind of recasting it in a different light and not trying exactly to match it up with the previous continuity. And maybe because I'm, just... If somebody was mainly interested in those cartoons, which are great, and then they didn't go sort of to the expanded universe type ideal or feeling, like I'm used to continuity being pliable for a story. That's just, my history with comic books, even if I didn't draw them. It's just stuff gets rebooted and kind of shifted around for different media all the time. And I'm cool with that, but not everyone is. So
I liked... To me, sometimes simple explanations work. It referenced a multiverse, of its own in this storyline, how there was a discovery through magic of the multiverse. And I always think sometimes when these books go to a magic explanation, that always works for me because there's a certain sense of, I think, disbelief because magic is capable. If you have it strong enough magic, it's capable of doing almost anything if you subscribe to that in like a storytelling aspect. So I think that worked really well. And sometimes that's kind of where you let your line go there. And then from that, I liked how they used time travel and history. And again, that was all magic-based. And they were side story parts. Because really, at the end of the day, what you really want to see is these characters interacting with each other, getting to know each other, us getting to know those characters through each other. So I'm glad that that the storyline had that focus, because that's really the meat and potatoes of the depth that I want. Will these people get along right out of the starting gate? Will they respect each other? I liked that it wasn't instant friendship. They weren't necessarily battling each other. I mean, the Lion-O He-Man battle made perfect sense to me. But in general, because these are honorable cultures, they aren't at each other's throats right away. But because they are different cultures, their reactions to each other are tentative only because they each have their strong reliance on their own way of fighting and their belief that their way is best and most comfortable to them. I liked that being a part of this story because I thought it made it unique, and that it wasn't your typical crossover where we're beholden to the characters fighting each other. The He-Man Lion-O one, I thought it was really great because it was a different sort of way to have it happen. Dude was, dead for all extended purposes. They throw him in a sarcophagus because he comes back to life, and it's very much like he's almost wild. He hasn't quite gotten that piece, and I really liked seeing the fight between the two of them in that sense, and Lion-O having to pull from a power source that is for him kind of like, I've got to dig in and grab everything I possibly can because this is an enemy who really can take me out if I don't. Or not an enemy, I mean, it's an
opponent.
Yes, an opponent is the best way to put it. And I really liked how that all played out in those sequences. I thought the story was really well put together for this. It was fun.
Good. Yeah, that's the that's the hope. The hope is that people will have fun and not get annoyed with it. I mean, if you're annoyed with the story, that's the opposite reaction that we want. But, people to each their own, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that was issue 4. I mean, each of these issues, there's been parts of it that it's like, I can't believe I'm getting to draw this. This has been like a goal of mine since I was a kid. But specifically drawing a He-Man Lion-O face-off was really, I mean, that was like a real dream come true. I mean, and also then in issue 5, basically just taking every toy you could metaphorically own and just pouring it out onto a battlefield and playing with them in this big battle. That was like, even though it was a lot of long hours, it was a really fun thing to get to be involved with. I know with Jeremy, he was saying, the colorist, he was saying a lot of he was saying that same type of thing, that he was having a great time, but he would be lying if every once in a while he wouldn't curse me a little bit, because I had drawn all this stuff that he was having to color. Afterwards, it's the kind of thing that I'll be really happy to show people. I don't feel like it's not the kind of thing I would walk around on having it on a t-shirt or something, but it's like, the kind of thing where if somebody said, what's the favorite comic book that you've drawn, or what's the most complex thing, I would point to, that double page spread and, pages 2 and 3. That's the second most complex. It was the most complex thing I'd ever drawn up until that point. And then there's a double page spread in issue 6 that was more complex for me to draw. This series takes the cake for the most difficult things that I've ever drawn. Now, when somebody asks me, I will have a clear answer in my mind. What was the hardest thing to draw? I'll point at those, issues 5 and 6 specifically.
Do you find, it's funny that you're saying that. It's just making me think of something that I find interesting. And I don't know if this happens, if it's not every project, but do you find that when you work on a project, or maybe each project, that you walk away learning something about yourself as an artist or as a creator or as a storyteller? And if so, what did you learn from this project, like that you'll take with you? Because I just found it, I enjoy, as a reader of your work, reader's not always the right word, as somebody who enjoys your work, I enjoy seeing the evolution. I've got the opportunity to really enjoy your work for years, and to just kind of really go on a journey with you as a fan of your evolution, and just seeing how, when I think I've seen it all from you, I see something more. So from this one, did you learn something from this about yourself, or your own preferences, or something, some growth piece that came from this? Does it work that way for you? There's not really a right or wrong answer. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I do. I try to learn stuff from each project, and if I'm doing it right, then I am developing as an artist throughout each process. I'm learning some new technique rendering wise. I mean, I could go on about like a bunch of little stuff, like about there's a bunch of little stuff like using the 0.3 pencil for the background figures, and that will contrast enough with the foreground stuff so that you have atmospheric perspective, even though you have rendering throughout the whole piece. Like that's something that I didn't know when I was working on Batman Ninja Turtles, because the visual scope was different. It was more of close-up medium shots and occasional wide, but not like this big epic, hopefully what is epic in scale. So, I mean, those type of things I learned, but that's not so much about myself. The stuff that I've probably learned about myself in this was like I don't know, I really wish I had it memorized, but there's a Bill Hicks is a comedian whom I like, who he was talking about, and I'm going to butcher every part of it, so I'm not even going to try to quote him or anything, but he was essentially talking about artists. He was talking about musicians who pour their soul and essentially have dedicated themselves. They've almost like ruined themselves they've poured themselves so much into this art form. It's the passion that you end up enjoying. Although the joke he makes, and I don't want to go this way, is like somebody who is so passionate that to make their art form better, their music better, they're willing to literally stand on stage and say, I hope you enjoyed the show, and then they shoot themselves afterwards. Of course, I don't want to do that. But what the reason that comes to mind is because when I'm working with, without exaggeration, between 15 to 18 hours a day on these things, I try every trick I can to keep myself engaged and not give up. Mm-hmm. Because after a few days of that, it becomes a little challenging. And then after a few more days of that, it becomes where you have to start turning your own ambitions as a human off, and instead you have to convert yourself purposely into some sort of art machine that is, you can't really think of other things that you'd rather be doing because they become like distraction, and that's the last thing you need. And then it's almost like personality wise, you're kind of stripping out all of the peripheria of your personality. What makes you, or what makes me, gives me a personality, are all things that are hindrances at that point. So what I'm getting at is, one of the things I learned about this, other than artistic stuff, but about myself, is like how far that I've pushed it farther than I normally have in the past, to keep myself focused and interested in whatever on a project of this scope. It's like, it's the amount of passion or dedication, but aside from that, it's about like the amount of discipline to then, and all that stuff sounds very, maybe, hearing myself say it sounds grand or something, but it's not really about being oh, I'm such a badass because I only got 4 hours of sleep. Like I've overheard that sort of tone at conventions before, where artists will say to each other, oh man, yeah, I'm just so busy, I'm only getting this much sleep. And it's almost like a brag and stuff. And it's not about any sort of a brag. It's more about, I mean, it's unhealthy to get that little sleep and to only be doing that stuff. I had to start standing up while I was inking because like my knees were starting to hurt, because I'm like sitting in the same like 3 or 4 positions every time. And so I like made this sort of mock stand-up desk. I have one for my computer, but I needed one, for my drafting table or whatever. I like set up this, whatever. The point though is those are the type of things, was to know how far I could push myself. And maybe there's a project I'll push myself even further on. But it's like, at least now I know that I've gone to that, at least that marker, that sort of mile marker, and, that I didn't know I could go to before. So I don't know, I guess that. And then also I learned now it takes about a week to thaw out from each to get my brain back to where it is at, like the normal Freddie, like to become a human again. And it really does feel like I'm thawing out, because I basically finished my deadline for issue 6 about a week and a half ago. And since then I've been doing like website updates. I got really sick right afterwards because I think there's something to that. You're just on the go constantly. And then my immune system was down, whatever. So I actually was able to just lay down and recover instead of having to work through being sick. Holy crap, I haven't had a chance to do that for like 10 years or something. But anyway, I've just been working on like side projects and getting caught up, a couple of covers, and catching up with friends who I haven't seen in a year, all of that stuff, and becoming a human again. Anyway, those are the kind of things that I've learned. There's like the previous version of what I thought being busy was. Now I have a deeper scale, a scale that goes even further into the sort of busyness, sleep deprived stage, Anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but that's the kind of stuff that I've learned, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think you're rambling at all. It's actually, I found it incredibly interesting because I don't come from that world. It's interesting to see some of the challenges that you do face. And I know you weren't putting it that way, like, the violin piece. I didn't take it that way. It's more of an explanation of what the process was like. My takeaway of it is the real key, I think, to not, I don't want to say surviving in comics, because that makes it seem like, to really thriving, I guess, in comics, to really growing, to being able to deliver the kind of projects that represent you as a name and as a style, as a growing and evolving style, is really developing a pace and learning how to maintain that pace without letting outside distractions get in the way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting takeaway from me on this one, just how challenging that can be from project to project, because each one has different needs and expectations of you.
For additional clarity, like, there are most people in daily life have a harder job than mine. Like, I don't have to physically get up on a roof to roof something or like build something, or like, it would be a challenge for me to deal like in customer service all of the time. Like, those things are harder than my job. But the hard part of my job is staying focused and intense on that task for such a long time, over and over and over. And, to me, it's like, it's been worth the sacrifice of Kiki and I. We don't have children. Most of, all my family and friends understand that if I'm under deadline, I'm just not going to be at your event. That's just what it comes down to. And so whenever I was younger and, would hear of artists who seemed, at the time, I just thought, oh, they're lazy. And maybe some of them are, but I don't know their circumstances. Eventually there becomes like these different forks in the road where priorities, maybe they change and maybe they don't, but it might be about, if we had children, I could not imagine working the same way that I'm working now and still being what I would consider a good parent. And some artists can handle that because they're frankly just better artists than me. And maybe the amount of time I'm spending is also because like I'm having to redraw things that they would get right the first time and stuff. So there's that aspect as well. But, I don't have to use the ink wash, sort of rendering style. I don't have to render everything the way that I am. Could have cheated on the scope a little bit more. I could have shaved like a day or two off the deadline if it was affecting me in that way. But part of it was like, I have a philosophy internally. I say, just don't be lazy. And that's a really easy way to get myself motivated, because it implies to myself, like, you're being lazy if you take that shortcut. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up is because, I have plenty of friends who have more conventional jobs that I think that their job individually is much harder physically. And, somebody is complaining about their job where they draw the funny books can sound a little annoying.
One of the things I always, because Sean and I have had conversations before about just the difficulties and jobs and whatnot, because with him being education, me being on, the corporate business side, some people say, oh, those teachers, they get summers off, they get all this, and and people don't look at the difficulty that a teacher will have. Like, if you're in front of a classroom, you have to be on the job at all times. There have been many days in my cube where I just completely vegged out for 8 hours and then left. And I got absolutely no work done. And I was able to just skate by without a problem. If you're in front of a classroom, you can't do that. Same thing on, like, with you, with your drawing. There are days where, people say, oh, he just draws pictures. Well, no, there's a lot more to just the layout, the creation, this and that. And just the mental mindset that you have to get yourself in to go from nothing to something amazing. On my end, I'm writing reports, I do internet searches, I do reviews, I do investigations, yada, yada, all that stuff. And some people say, oh, that looks kind of difficult and interesting. And on my head, I'm like, it is what I do. And it's, there's that level of difficulty you have that level of difficulty. And I think that's the thing that everybody's got to, look at. It's, no one has a cakewalk. No one has an easy life. We all have to work at this. Our various degrees of working come from different stuff. And it's, that's whenever I hear someone, I always hate when people try to, downplay someone's, complaining. Everybody's got a right to complain. Everybody's got a right to say, man, I had a tough day here. Yes, you did. You did have a tough day.
Right.
And especially looking at, again, we keep going over details and just everything you went through to put into this book. I think you've got a very you've got a very righteous claim here, man. I don't think you got to worry about that, because you can see the pain, you can see the struggle you put into this, man.
There's
absolutely appreciate it.
Thank you. You're going to be flooded with emails complaining. You're going to get a flood of emails from the Union of Cakewalkers, who their job is to literally take cake and to walk it down the street or something, and they're going to say, stop using that phrase because it's actually a pretty hard job. like you can't just say something's a cakewalk to say it easy. Yeah, I'm just joking, but
well, to be honest, no, I probably will get someone to complain about that.
A union of cakewalkers who've existed for longer than before the Revolutionary War or something like that ticked off or something. By the way, I have one of my sister-in-laws is a teacher, and her husband is a superintendent of a school, and yeah, they have a lot of responsibility on their shoulders that from the outside, if you just look at the most superficial parts of their job, it may seem like it's going to be easy, but just the level of responsibility, I could maybe teach like an art class every once in a while, but the level of, it's a completely different thing I'm just not cut out for. So I can recognize the difficulty in their jobs. And also there's a unspoken level of difficulty kind of where they have to be careful with sort of like public perception of their job or what they do and what they can put on social media and stuff like that, because people have been fired for, while off the clock, going to a family event and having a few drinks or something, and then that would get posted. I'm not talking about specifically my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, but I'm saying like that sort of thing has happened. Like I don't drink at all, but if somebody got a photo from a certain angle, they might see like a beer on the table because the place that I'm at, there's somebody who's drinking something. And if that got posted online, probably no one would care because I'm just a comic book artist, even if it looked like I was drinking that drink. But if it's a teacher or a superintendent or a principal or something, it can actually blow up into some big thing and they can lose their job. I mean, holy crap. That's pretty scary.
You said something that struck me as interesting, and it's something that, it's amazing. We've talked so much over the years, and I feel like every time we talk, I learn something more. I think that says a lot about what you share with all of us when you're on the show, and it's appreciated. You were talking about, like, family and friends needing to understand, when you can't be at places or you can't participate in something, or I'm sure at times where you were there, but you have to draw, and what that looks like. I think about my own job. Jim referenced the fact that at one point I was a teacher. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm far from that now. I haven't been a teacher in years. I'm in administration now. I'm taking classes now for my principal licensure. So that takes up a lot of my time, and family actually has to be understanding of that for me, because there's times where I have to skip events because I'm writing a project, doing something for work. Because I'm in administration, I'm a tech director in my district. There's projects that I'm doing that fall outside of the work hours that I'm responsible for going well. And if I take that break, it's going to go wrong, and that's on me, and ultimately affects a lot of people outside of me. So I'm thinking about what you were saying with that piece. How do you, and I guess this is where I connected with it, I'm like, how do you address that with people? Is it always easy? I mean, do they have to, because they aren't in your world, they don't do what you do, without throwing anybody under the bus, because I'm not trying to put you in that position. Have there been challenges to getting people to understand what you do? What's the reception been? And obviously it affects you in some way too, because you have to give up things that you're probably like, man, I really wanted to go to that and I can't. How does that work for you?
The difficulty, it usually at this point, it usually comes if there's a new person in my life that I've met, and I wish that I could spend more time with them. So, for example, like my friend Pat, if he has a new friend that's kind of come into the group and we really like him, but essentially, the specific situation just came up, and I don't want to name a bunch of names, but basically they moved out of town. So, like, my friend Pat's friends, who we all played volleyball with a long time ago, all this stuff. But the point is that they had to move out of town, and they had like a going away thing, but it was right during my deadline, and so it might come off as being insensitive if I don't show up, but I really couldn't. So it's like, being mindful of that in advance, and maybe sending them an email about it, and explaining the situation and making sure it doesn't seem like a blow off. That's maybe, a small example of it. But for people who've known me for a while, I think, although, in this like last week and a half or whatever, since I finished my deadline, I've seen friends that I haven't seen in like a year and a half or a year. I made a list of everybody I wanted to see before I start getting into the next project, which I'm probably going to be starting another week. But, aside from that, it's like usually it's like when I'm at a convention, or if I meet a cousin or something who has a new significant other, and like their immediate assumption, I've heard this so many times. It's like, they'll say, I've had a tattoo I've always wanted to be drawn. And they just assume that it's like, oh, it's just like a real quick thing that I'll fit it right in or something. But it's like, if I'm working on my deadline stuff, I won't have time. And if I'm done with the deadline, the last thing I want to do is draw your tattoo. Like I just, even if I'm sitting there staring into space, I would rather do that than draw your tattoo, But that could come off really rude if I were to say it that way. So instead it's explaining, I love my job because I do, and then I'll start explaining, just the amount of hours and how eventually you just want to get away from it and, go be a regular person for a little bit or something. But it can become difficult if their response, instead of going, oh, I didn't know that, or, oh, okay, that's cool, their response instead is, oh, but just do it real quick. No, just do it real quick. And we've had a running joke of, anytime I meet a new artist, or if I'm hanging out with an artist at a convention or something, I'll ask them, because every one of us have stories that are like that. It's the best one that I heard, who the source maybe remain nameless for now, or anonymous. It was drawing like the Last Supper, but with, comic book characters, and his response was like, I'm just doing like quick sketches, and the person who was asking him for it, just their answer to it over and over, because they, I guess, had a prolonged conversation, was they just kept going, but just do it real quick. Like, and what does that mean? That I'm going to... Okay, so before you said to draw out real quick, I thought it would take a long time to draw the Last Supper and different characters in place of Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Judas or whatever. But since you said real quick, then it'll be no problem. I'll just get right on that, Anyway, yeah, it's you can identify, since we do a lot of conventions, we at least usually do like 5 or 6 conventions a year. At least you can get camaraderie with other people who've kind of dealt with the same thing.
Does that help? I mean, as far as just their common understanding of what you do, just to kind of maybe recharge or motivate you, or maybe ideas on what not to do?
Yeah, or it's how they handled that situation. A good example is I always draw for, maybe saying this in a public forum will get me into not trouble, but make it harder on myself later. If a kid walks up to me at a convention, or when I'm drawing or whatever, and wants a little sketch, I will always say yes. I will basically stop what I'm doing and draw them a sketch, because there's something about that. There's something about that interaction that it's endearing to me. I actually enjoy that because they're coming from like I'm not. If I draw something for somebody and they want to sell it, I'm totally cool with that. But this kid, it's like a different thing for them. And so it's like, yes, absolutely. But I've seen adults, I can see them priming their child, like they'll be off to the side. So the sketch is essentially for the adult. The adult will be basically saying, go over there and get a Batman sketch. Like that's basically what they're saying. And then the kid walks up. And I've literally seen, because I've done, San Diego Comic-Con for like 14 years in a row. I've done all these conventions. And the kid walks up and sometimes they're like, I would like a sketch of... And then they draw a blank because they've forgotten who they want the sketch of. And then they look up at their parent, and then the parent whispers to them the character that they're supposed to ask for. It's like sometimes it's not always that bad, but sometimes it's that transparent, where it's like this sketch is for the adult, but that adult is using their child as like a workaround to get a free sketch. So I learned that one of the ways it's not a way to get around doing the sketch. I want to do the sketch for the kid, but I want it to be for the kid, is to then basically engage directly with the child and ignore the adult and say, who's your favorite character? And do the sketch for the kid of their favorite character, even if it ends up in the hands of the adult. At that point, I don't care. I'll never, I won't know that anyway. But to make sure it's of the kid's favorite character instead of for the adult. And that's something I learned from comparing war stories with other artists and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of, it's like you learn all sorts of stuff. You learn ins and outs of different parts of the industry like that you wouldn't really know unless you were in that situation. But there's a bunch of little stuff. And sometimes it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't even think of unless it came up at the convention that day, and then you bring it up and then somebody else says, oh yeah, that happened to me and the way I handled it was this way, So it's that kind of stuff.
I think the fan interaction piece is interesting to me, because you want to, when you're at a convention, part of the purpose of being there is obviously the fan interaction, but you also don't want it to always, lead to a negative experience for you, because then it starts to become... I've been at conventions before where, and it's honestly, I'm going to say, to commend people who work in the comic industry. My experiences of meeting most of my favorite comic creators have been nothing but stellar. And I think it's very hard when you see people at conventions and they've been there all weekend. And I'm going to say to the dreaded Sunday, which is usually the last day of the convention. People have been working their butts off. They've met so many people. Sometimes they're peddling their comics, as far as trying to get people motivated. They're tapped out. Been doing sketches all weekend, doing commissions all weekend. That's a tough day, Sunday. I've been there as a podcaster. So when I say I've been there as a podcaster, it's not the same as the work you guys are doing. I know I'm tapped out on a Sunday when I've been at a convention working in that capacity. So I can't imagine what it's like for people that are doing the kind of work that you guys do. So I guess where I'm saying the positive is, overall, I have a really strong affinity for how great people are even on Sundays. To me as a fan, because I'll walk up to their tables and I'm Joe Nobody, so I'm usually treated very well by comic creators on that, and very few crabby people. So I think it's helpful that you guys have those opportunities to, I think, vent and kind of come up with ways to deal with situations that can probably pull you down if you let them. Because if you don't laugh about them, if you don't come up with survival skills, it can lead you to become one of, I think, that small group that I'm talking about. That very few times have I been disappointed, but I've met creators who have been some of my favorite, who that one experience where I met them has taken years worth of work that I really loved, and to a certain extent tarnished it a bit.
Yeah.
Just where I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I have, the same thing has happened to me. A few of my favorite artists, I've met them, and they, that same type of thing happened to me. It was my fan interaction, even though I'm in some ways a peer of theirs, but they're still way above me in both stature and professional, and especially in my own mind, But on a side note, who's I was nervous to meet, but who's really, really awesome is Kevin Eastman. Like, he was one of my art heroes from whenever I was very young, and I was really nervous to meet him because I've been disappointed with other art heroes of mine. But he's so cool, and in a genuine way. So my first interaction with him was after Batman Ninja Turtles was announced, but I had only done like 2 covers, and I met him at a San Diego con that year, which would have been the 2015 show, and he was in full-on meet and greet mode because he was about to do a signing, and within about 30 seconds, I felt like I had known him 20 years and felt like he was my best friend. He was like, let's get a photo together, and he put his arm around me, and I have these, I have a couple of photos and stuff, and he was amazing. And as I walked away, I was like, that he just seems so genuine. And then, and part of that is he's used to this, and he has a genuine affinity for fans and readers, and he has the right attitude, I have to say, because since then we've had a chance in the following San Diego Con, which was this last one, and then we hung out. There is an IDW Ninja Turtle like art exhibit that exists in San Diego that is on the premises of the IDW offices. They exhibited some of my Batman Ninja Turtles artwork in like late June or something of 2016, and so I flew in for that opening, and it was me and Kevin basically were there. I mean, my wife Kiki was there, some of my family like my aunt and my cousin and stuff, they were there as well. But the point that I'm making is I had the chance to interact with him in a very personal way, and he was all genuine, and it was awesome. And then we went to separately, like I had a convention in Dublin, Ireland, that was after San Diego Con, and he was attending the same show. We didn't plan it, but it just happened to be that way. And we got to hang out with him and his wife, Courtney, and they're awesome people. The reason I'm bringing this up, by the way, is not to say, hey, look at me, I'm awesome because I got to hang out with Kevin Eastman, even though he is really cool. It's because it's risky kind of to meet your heroes of any sort, because they could be having an off day. So if I now roll back the curtain and get into, more of like my own convention mindset, you've had almost the same conversation 200 times that day because it's about the new movie trailer that's just been announced or whatever it is, and you're just exhausted or burnt out from another show. It's like there's all these normal, just everyday sort of mundane life things that kind of add up, and you're just having kind of a bad day, and so you're not quite as charming or gregarious like whenever you meet the guy, and you don't even realize like you met somebody. I'm now talking about myself on the other side of the table, and I have no idea. I try to be in an up mood whenever I'm at a convention, but sometimes you're just tired and you don't even really realize that your energy is low, or that it's that transparent or evident to the person you're interacting with. And if on the worst day of my convention going experience, towards the end of the year where it's been a busy year and stuff, I happen to meet somebody and they get this impression where I seem like I didn't care, that can make a huge impact to them. And so I'm contextualizing it like I've been on both sides of that. Like maybe when I met my artistic heroes, they were having that day, or maybe they're really jerks. I just, I'm not really sure because I don't know them, but it makes it, like when I'm around media guests, that's cool. It's neat to be around, Jason Momoa or Sean Astin, or we've been in the green rooms together and stuff, and those are very nice guys, by the way. Jason Momoa and Sean Astin, legitimately nice people. I didn't feel like the geek out thing. I didn't feel the fan thing. It's like, hey, how's it going? Is essentially my feeling. But then later on, it's like, holy crap, that's Kevin Eastman over there. Like I'm all nervous. Like, oh Jesus, I don't want to make an ass of myself and come off as like some weirdo fanboy, even though I am. And so it's really rewarding when they end up being really nice people. And most of us comic book people, the conventions, our goal is to interact with people. That's one of the main reasons we're there, in addition to promotion of whatever project that we're about to start on or whatever. Occasionally you just might catch us on an off day, and unfortunately that can really affect somebody's long-lasting opinion of not just that artist, but also all of their work. And because whenever I met, some of my favorite artists and they seem like not so nice, it does kind of color their work. I'm looking at artwork that they drew and it's like, somehow it seems less special.
I had a writer who is a favorite comic writer of mine. I'm not going to name names because I'm not looking to bash anybody on this. Yeah. But it was one of my favorite comic writers of all time. Going back,
I know who it is, I'm going to name his name. So I'm just joking.
But going back to when I was a kid, and I was super stoked to meet the writer, and went up, and to your point, it could have been that this writer was just having a bad moment. And I get that, you just been maybe 30 people ran through the line and somebody said something that maybe just brought them down or something like that. So I get it, and I can get that point. But it was in that moment, I don't want to say it wasn't a horrible experience, but I felt like I was just looking for this moment where I just wanted to say thank you for the work that you did. And I felt like it was such a dismissive experience. It's really what it was, that I felt like, wow, I almost wish I hadn't met the person because I had walked into that experience so jazzed because of years of great experience with the work. And then, it's like somebody popped the balloon. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't change the fact that I love the work still and all that, but it really is disconnected from the person now. And I have to look back on it and really kind of go, well, I had some great experiences with that work. It's interesting. I've got on my wall, I'm not a big one for getting the celebrity photo thing. But there's been a few in recent years that I've been like, okay, I had the opportunity to get a picture with Stan Lee. Yeah, I'm buying that because, Stan Lee's one of those icons. And to be able to just say I got a picture with Stan Lee. Mm-hmm. The cast of The Walking Dead, it was 4 of them, and I was really into the show. I'm still really into the show, but at the time I was at the height of being into the show, that like a chance to meet them. And I'm referencing those because in those experiences, it was the assembly line that you kind of go through to get those pictures. They were super kind, and I look at those pictures with great fondness. There's another celebrity that will name this in there that I'm glad I've got the picture because of the fact that I can say I got a picture with this person. But I'm looking at the difference between in the picture with the cast of The Walking Dead. I've got my arm around people, my arms around those people, and I look back at that experience being they were just really, whether they were feeling that way or not, they went out of their way to make me feel like they were glad to see me. Stan Lee did the same thing. This other one, you can actually see I am like standing. It almost looks like there's some invisible person between us, like keeping us apart. Right. And it looks so awkward. And it's funny when you see it. It's like one of these pictures are not like the other. It's like, and it's true to the experience. Henry Winkler's up there too. It's the other one. He's wearing this yellow pullover sweater and purple pants. And and the reason why I'm even referencing him, I will honestly say, as far as any time I've ever done anything like that, and I did that because he was the Fonz, and I grew up a Happy Days junkie.
Sure.
I went through that line. I kid you not. He asked every single person their name, asked some fact about them through some question, referenced it during the photo shoot, and their name. Right. And I'm like, I remember, he's the only one that ever asked me my name, and I don't think that everyone is beholden to do that, but I really appreciated the fact that in his moment, he recognized whether or not it was genuine or not. I don't know. I don't know him well enough to know that. But he did in that moment go out of his way to make each person feel special, which he didn't have to do it because the picture where I'm referencing with the celebrity where I didn't have that experience and I look like I'm 3 miles away, he got my money and I got the photo of saying I got a picture with that person. So fine. But here's what I don't have with that experience. my favorite one out of the batch, and that's even with Stan Lee, and there was the Henry Winkler one, because like this dude like went out of his way, and he didn't have to make that an experience, because he had my buck anyway. I really appreciated that, and I think that's something at a convention I recognize that. Maybe when I go up to somebody's table and they do a sketch for me or a commission or something like that, or they sign something for me, or even just a wink and a nod or something, they're going out of their way to do that. Maybe in that moment they're not feeling their best. They're not as upbeat. They're finding something intrinsically to say, all right, you know what, I'm just gonna do this person a solid, whether or not I'm actually feeling that way in the moment. And I appreciate that at a con when artists do it, when writers do it, when celebrities do it. I think it's not always so easy to do. So I think those periods of time when you guys get together and vent and kind of come up with strategies is so critical, I think, to the connection with your audience that is kind of necessary when you're at these events, because I think the competition of what you're dealing with outside of comics now to try and make that connection with the audience is so strong that I think it's important that those experiences be as upbeat and connection based as possible. So I think it's great that you guys have that outlet, because it does mean something to us.
Sort of interaction that you were just describing with, specifically with Henry Winkler and stuff, is in like diametric opposition to, I heard there's another experience of an actor I won't name, but an actor that I used to really like, and I still like their performance. I was watching a movie the other day, and Kiki and I were like, isn't it a shame that guy's a jerk? Which his experience was like, or his signing experience was like, you had to, basically you could not interact with him. He had handlers that, basically what happened was he was sitting at a table, you would walk up to the front of the line, but the front of the line was like, let's say 6 feet away or something from the actor, and then the handler would take your photo or whatever it was over to him. He would sign it, and then they would bring it over to you. Like, so really you got to be within the vicinity. You were within, you could see that the guy was really there, but he wasn't interacting with anyone. He had his head down most of the time. One of my friends who runs one of the conventions, one of the artist alleys or whatever, he did not know that this was the arrangement. So when he showed up, he didn't know that the talent didn't want to like have any FaceTime with the attendees or whatever. Just walked over and was like, hey, how's it going? And like, he was like, you mind if we get a picture? And he took a selfie because he didn't understand the rules at the time and stuff. Plus he also is helping to run part of the convention, but I'm just saying he just didn't know that this was a boundary that he was crossing and stuff. But he showed me, oh man, I wish that I had the photo. The look on the actor's face was like, if like right now I'm shooting, I'm almost breaking your camera with the look on my face. Like it was that sort of like death stare. It's really unfortunate. I mean, maybe, who knows what's going on in that dude's personal life at that time. Maybe he was having, problems with family, or I don't know. But anyway, whatever. I mean, these are like good problems to have, maybe. I'm not sure. But, it's pretty subtle or pretty small potatoes compared to some of the other problems I could have in my life. But yeah, it's something I try to be mindful of as somebody that I have met people and had a bad experience, and I try to give them the benefit of the doubt, and then also try to be on my best behavior. But you just never know if you've kind of, like, I was in a hurry that day and maybe I came off as being dismissive and didn't intend on it, and then that might stick with somebody for the next 20 years of their life. Who knows?
Yeah, because you were dismissive of me and I still like you.
Oh, what'd you say? I wasn't paying attention.
It's actually, I'm going to be honest, you are my favorite convention sketch experience. Only because of the fact that I gave you a brand new sketchbook that I did. You had just because of the nature of the fact that when I gave you the book, it had the inside cover not done yet. You had done this great Robin sketch a sketch commission, where you had done the inside cover for me and extended it over to the next page. It was just because of the nature of the page layout, you took advantage of that and did that. And it's one of those today that I open up to this day and look at as being one of my favorites, just because of the fact that, like, I like your artwork so much that anything you would have given me in there would have been special to me, for the purpose of the fact that just to have an original that is mine from you was enough for me. I like that as a fan experience whenever I'm interacting with artists and just having that piece. I don't get to do it very much anymore, as far as going to conventions and having that experience. But being able to look in that book and go, wow, this is a guy who went just a little bit above and beyond for me. When you're at a convention, I'm well aware that you got a queue of commissions that you're working through. And, trying to do them just really well for every single person. I appreciate the fact that doing that extra thing was extra time for you just to try and make that experience something for me. That kind of stuff sticks with you. And there's stories that you'll, years refer back to and kind of go, you guys got to see this. I mean, this is this cool thing that I've got. That's, I think, the power of when you go to conventions and you have the opportunity to meet people. And I actually encourage listeners over here, if you've never been to a convention, because I just know from my own experience how many times we have people that call into the show or will write into the show and say, I'm going to my first convention. I'm super excited about that. Do it. Go to a convention. Meet some of your favorites. Do take advantage of bringing sketchbooks and sign up early for commissions. Check websites out, because a lot of times artists will post something on their website about either when to meet them or when to get a commission in, or sometimes pre-book commissions. Definitely. I think it's really important to reach out ahead of time and get that piece in play so you don't miss that experience.
And also, I want to add, because everything you're saying I agree with and is good advice. Something else I want to say is it seems to be more and more common that comic book artists are starting to charge for signatures. I do not and will never charge for signatures, by the way. I've signed an entire short box of comic books, and I don't expect any money for that, because it's it's my privilege to be a part of this, and that's the least I can do. But it's good also to look and see if there's a sign. I was sitting next to an artist who was charged, and I don't fault people for signing comics and charging a signature. I can understand their point and stuff, but there was an artist who had, I think it was $2 for one signature, or whatever. The point is, though, that people didn't really pay attention, so they were like, "Hey, I've got this stuff for you to sign." He signed a bunch of stuff, and then he was like, "Look," it became this very awkward exchange where then he was expecting to get paid because he had this sign that said X number of dollars, whatever, for a signature. Just look into that stuff to avoid a weird situation, or ask ahead of time. I'm, more than happy to say, "Oh yeah, just give me the books. I want you to give them to me. I want to sign them." Rather than if you're going with somebody who you don't ask, and then now you're suddenly like, oh, I didn't even really have that in my budget, and now I owe this guy $5 and he has my books, and it becomes very strange. So anyway, just keep that in mind too. Some people do charge for signatures, and it's good to keep an eye out for that.
Also limits to signatures, because True. I've been in line before where it's clearly the person will put on their no more than 5 items or something like that, and that number please take as a grain of salt. I'm just throwing out as an example.
Sure.
I've seen people where they've come up with these long boxes and they pull out a stack and set it up there, and they put the person into this awkward position where it's they've got to say, it's read the signage. If the person says no more than 5, stick to that. Don't put them in a position where they have to say that. Pick out your favorite 5 before you get up there and just be done with it.
Yeah, or be prepared to get in line again. That's right. The courtesy. On a side note, the couple times I've signed entire short boxes worth of comics, what happened was either they left the short box there for me and I could do it throughout the day when there wasn't a queue of people, or they brought it to me a stack at a time throughout the day, or if I had a line of people, they would bring up a stack and then basically go, for their next stack, they would step out of the line, go to the back of it, and then wait again. So it became, they were being totally courteous and cool with it. It's they did it the right way. Those are the right ways, is to be as sort of flexible as possible.
Yeah, that stuff's, I think it's really important to read the person that you're working with. If somebody says no, accept no, and don't make it a thing. And just just go with it. I think it's an important piece to it. It's funny as we're talking about this. I'm looking at this great picture. It's actually from issue 5. It's when the two magic users come back and they have that disc with them, and they're like, "You have the power," and you see this big burst of crazy coming out with. I like that it was Adam's dad leading the charge, because I was a big fan of the He-Man cartoon growing up, and it was obviously He-Man was always your main character, but you want to see Dad he's the king. Let this dude have a role. And I really loved how in this one he was leading the charge, and you got to see all of the characters in that piece. I really loved and appreciated it, because I liked how we had the lore from the two worlds, like the two different magic users kind of blending together up at the top, each of their hands on that magic disc. It just was a really pretty, along with the eyes in the background of the past and the magic reaching out. I really loved the whole framing of that. I can't imagine how long that piece took to put together, but it was a piece I wanted to talk about, just because I really appreciated when you blend two worlds together and kind of have them echo and mirror each other and show such power in it and kind of get everybody right. It's something that we as fans geek out at. And I know those pieces take a little bit longer. I think part of that is due to the education of yourself and other guests that we've had on the show who've taken the time to tell me a little bit more about what the background of it looks like. So when I see those pieces, I know now as a reader, naturally, when I go through, I really enjoy kind of taking my time and working through them to just catch every nuance in every character. Jim pointed out, characters earlier that he noticed in other pieces, and I like that part.
That page was written as like 5 separate panels, and first of all, I'm contextualize what the king's motivation is there. He thinks he just discovered that, just like 2 days before that, he just discovered that Prince Adam, his son, is He-Man, because He-Man died right in front of him, and he saw him revert back to Adam, and he's like, holy crap, I didn't know this. So he's going through a lot there. Now it's like Grayskull, the Master of the Universe, most mighty warrior, is dead, because they don't know. This story is kind of happening concurrently with issue 4. It's not really laid out that way, but you can make that assumption that, Lion-O and He-Man are up on Third Earth, while on Eternia these events are happening. You could almost, if somebody were so inclined, could make a fan edit, like where you cross-cut perhaps between the two of them, but they're basically happening at the same time. So this is their best final stand while they have. This is the most power or the most resistance they're ever going to be able to muster, because they don't know if Lion-O will be successful in his idea that he could resurrect He-Man. But anyway, so now just about the artistic process. There was that was written as I think it was 5 pages. I think that's that's page number 13, if I'm not mistaken. But as I was basically trying to think of it as whenever I'm reading the script, I'm trying to look for places where I can combine panels together to make for a larger moment or more impactful moment, or areas that I need to break down where it's been written as one panel, but you need to break it down to 2 or 3 panels to get a better emotional impact or better just clarity to know what's happening, to make these actions more clear. And with this, as I kept condensing, I can combine these 2 panels together, I can combine these other 2 together, then maybe I could even, I think I could combine those now 2 super compact panels into one, and then make it a montage thing. And I just kept condensing it, so basically turned into, you could technically consider the energy that's making the discs visible on the Ancient Spirits of Evil. You could kind of count that as a panel border if you were really so inclined, because that's what it was in my rough layout, by the way. That's why I'm thinking of it like this. So it was almost became 2 separate panels, but then in the execution, I eventually was just I can make this one sort of montage / cover image. When Rob saw it later, his reply was that he loved that page. It could be a cover. That was, the sort of impact that he felt that it had. He felt like it was cover-like. But that's basically, they've been essentially unable to do a darn thing to the Ancient Spirits of Evil throughout this battle. They blew the head off of one of them, and it just formed right back, and from wisps of smoke, right, solidified again. But now they know the Achilles heel of all the Ancient Spirits of Evil, so this is now their best chance, and it's this moment of heroism for them to, and King Randor is right in the front.
I think it's probably one of the, and I agree with totally his comment about it could be cover worthy. I really appreciate when you get artwork that is those ones inside the comic where I'm like, I would love this to be a poster. I would love this to be a cover. Those type of things. To me, I always go to poster because I tend to have in my house a lot of comic work. There's sketches that I've gotten at conventions, commissions I've gotten at conventions, covers that I've had signed. I'm looking right now at the Robin cover from the issue, the Suicide issue. You had signed that one because we'd done an episode on it in the show. So that was one that one of the times when I was at a con and I met you, I asked you to sign that one, and I've got that on there just because there's a special connection to that particular issue for me because of the experience we had not only with enjoying the book, but also with time we had recording it. So, I mean, I have a lot of that. My office is like filled, my walls filled with that type of art and different experiences on here. So when I look at something like this, I'm like, this I would love framed on my wall. Just because it's that kind of piece. And I actually, when I was referring to it, I kept referring to it as a piece. I love when I'm reading comics and you hit those pages where you're like, man, this is just great art, and you feel like you're having like a museum experience. And I think that's part of the unique experience you have with comics, is that the pages take you on a journey. And every page is different. The purpose of each page is different. And the experience you have when you turn a page and go, whoa! That type of stuff I think it's unique to the medium because of the fact that you're dealing with so many pages each month that you hit those experiences. And this was one of those ones where I'm like, I can't go through this episode without talking about this particular piece because it was one that really struck me.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It was, again, just trying to keep with the scope of it, and I could have probably reduced the number of characters I drew and that sort of thing so that it wasn't as difficult to draw, but it was, supposed to be essentially a rallying cry for the remaining forces, so all of the Eternian Guard that was left, and then the rest of the Masters of the Universe. So, but it was, whether it would be a cover-worthy or a poster-worthy image, I'm glad that there's been you and the Mattel guys were saying that they felt like it was, but ultimately it was, hopefully it would have the impact of like the moment where all the G.I. Joes yell yo Joe, they rush into battle, and it's that big team shot. That was the intent for sure.
You know what? I just noticed something on that page because I was going to ask you a question about continuity in the book, because I know you draw one page here or something. You won't necessarily go in chronological order throughout the pages. Mm-hmm. And I really applauded the fact that with Tigra, because how he's casting his illusion around Grayskull, so he's concentrating and in physical pain, and throughout this you keep him doing that well, and just he's still, you can tell here's where he casts it, and you kept that in order, knowing that you're doing this artwork out of order. But looking at that big page just now, I noticed I saw Tigra in there, and sure enough, he's gripping his head. He's got Panther behind. He's not heavy. It's he's right there in the background. He's of course got Snarf next to him. A man Snarf, who I always dig. But I see him doing in the pose with the memory. First off, outstanding on attention to detail that you got that. But how do you keep track if you're not doing page 1 to page 2 to page 3? How are you keeping track when you're creating this stuff?
Sometimes I mess up. What I actually thought you were going to say, because I did mess up on that page, I was going to sink in my chair if you actually noticed it. I had done the 2 pages after that. There's the run that, let me see, where Chitara and Tila are on a sky sled, and Chitara has a premonition that what they're about to do, because she has low-level psychic ability. She has a premonition that if they go this one flight path, they're going to get blasted and killed. And in that page, she has out her staff. Now, her staff is a collapsible staff that can go on the back of her gauntlet. So you could assume that from page 13, that the big cover type image that we're talking about, the big pinup, then you turn the page and there's the 3 big panels where her and Tila are now on the sky sled and it's airborne and taking up off the panel. Those 2 pages, she did not have her staff out initially whenever I had, in quotes, finished the page, whenever I thought I had the page finished. But somebody at Mattel, so either Rob or Lloyd, I don't actually know, because usually when they email, it's a joined email, with both of their ideas or notes or whatever thing that they're communicating. one of them noticed that she didn't have her staff out on those 2 pages, but she did have it on the next page where they make the run to attack the crocodile that has the one eye that does the eye beam. And so I had to patch it in afterwards. But there's still kind of a continuity error because the montage image on page 13, she's holding it in her right hand. And then when you turn the page, she's holding the staff in her left hand, because that's what made the most sense for what I had already drawn. So I hadn't initially drawn her to have her staff out already. In my mind, it was more like she could have extended it. It's telescoping. She could have extended it from the back of her gauntlet in between that page and the next page. But so I still make mistakes. I mean, and that's a situation where I made a mistake, but because we're doing a team, basically using teamwork, so either Rob or Lloyd caught it saved my bacon, so to speak. It helped me out. And then there's other times where, because at the end, especially on a big fight scene like this, it is easier to, it's harder to keep all the details straight. It's easier to kind of miss little stuff here or there. But what I try to do in general, and I've done this for years, is like before I consider the page totally final, I will flip through all the scans that I have, or all the pages that I have, to make sure that they match up continuity-wise from this page to that page. I just try to take an extra couple of minutes, or sometimes it might be an afternoon if it's the entire book that I'm looking at, to make sure it matches up. Usually, like the first issue of a series that I'm working on, we're far enough ahead that I can kind of spare that time. Like the colorist, Jeremy, is not like right on my heels coloring the pages. So I can take like an afternoon maybe and go through every single page, maybe even at the very end before I've uploaded any of the pages. Like I have them done and they know I have them done, but I haven't uploaded the high res. I'll go through and just make sure everything is within continuity or continuous. So anyway, stuff still gets through the cracks like that. Oh, and a big one. Geez. Yeah. In issue 1, there's a big continuity error that I made because I drew issue 1 of He-Man Thundercats. The last page of the issue has the ancient spirits of evil that are talking to Skeletor, and they appear as like these sort of amorphous energy blobs in the background. I basically drew, without realizing it at the time, I drew the 2011 version of the ancient spirits of evil from the Thundercats reboot cartoon. So what's supposed to be, and what is in the rest of the book, a warthog, a crocodile, a bull, and a vulture, instead were whatever the 2011 version are, which is like an ape, a jackal, and like whatever else. The point, though, is that I messed up. So if you have the first printing of issue 1, if the amorphous nature of the background things could make you not really notice what they are, but I did mess up. So I actually changed it. It's like I drew it, nobody caught it, but it was totally my mess up because I'm the one who's drawing the book. Mattel did not happen to notice, but it was my mess up. I make that clear because I take responsibility for it. And then I turned in those pages, and then by the time I finished the book, I didn't catch the error until after San Diego Con was over, because I finished issue 1 right before San Diego Con of this year, of 2016 rather. Turned in the book. San Diego happens. That's a week later. I mean, because it's almost like a full week. And then I noticed, I don't even remember what drew my attention to it, but by that point it was too late. The book was already like at the printer. So I then contacted my editors and pointed out the mistake. And I said, what I'd like to do is just patch the color file, and whenever it gets taken to trade, it'll be the correct versions of the characters. And their response was, it's not super noticeable, but we appreciate it. So the point, though, is that in the second printing, we didn't know that the first issue was going to go to a second printing, so it's actually fixed in that. So that's an example of where I thought I was being on top of the continuity, but you can't catch everything. And in that situation, we were able to fix it for the second printing in the trade. Or in issue 5, I was able to add the staff, so at least there was continuity there. But sometimes stuff just gets... I mean, I'm literally drawing like 30 or 40 characters, at least in issue 5, and so some mistakes are going to happen. And in issue 1, I just flat out messed up and drew the wrong version of the characters. Ancient Spirits of Evil.
I hadn't noticed, to be honest with you. So
had or had not noticed?
Had not.
Okay. Unfortunately, the problem for issue 1, what it could mean to some people if they know the lore well, first of all, they'll notice the difference. There might have been somebody, I actually don't know if this happened because I don't pay much attention to like online reviews or anything, but if they might have thought, holy crap, somehow they're bringing the Ancient Spirits of Evil from the original series and the somehow the 2011 version of the cartoon Ancient Spirits of Evil are somehow joining in. Like, that might have like really confused them. Like, wow, this story is going to be really weird if we're crossing over the continuities and stuff. But no, I just messed up. That was the problem.
When you do these projects, because these are your babies. I mean, and it's true of I'm sure any creator who values what they're doing, and you look at the body of work as a whole. Are you able to go back to, and I don't mean this in a narcissistic sense, do you look back at some of your older work just to kind of like remember you back then and kind of see your own progression? I'm sure every artist is different, as far as they kind of leave the past in the past. Others look back and kind of go, how did I do that? What was I thinking of to wrap my head around that? Or I want to move past that. Let me take a look at it. Do you fall somewhere in there? Do you fall somewhere in the middle? What is I know time is obviously always a factor for you. Mm-hmm. Does any of your previous work factor into things that you do?
Yeah, I try to, my goal is if I'm looking at my old art, and old could be even the He-Man Thundercat stuff now, it's a different chapter of my life. I'm moving into a different chapter or whatever, and try to learn what I can as far as like my boundaries, like I was describing earlier. But I try to fairly judge the work. I can look at it from any perspective because I was so intimately involved, but I try to look at it primarily as if I don't know that Freddie was under X amount of time constraints. Like I'm now thinking about like the old Robin work or something. Like if I were to look at that now, my evaluation would I can look at it both with that factored in, if I was drawing it in 2.5 weeks or something, or 3 weeks or 4, or without that, and just go, okay, let's just assume that time was not a factor for the artist that drew this book. I can look at it in that sort of detached nature. The He-Man Thundercat stuff, the Batman Ninja Turtle stuff, that is a little harder, at least right now. I don't have a ton of perspective or distance from it. But yeah, I can look at it and judge it to what I think is fairly. Usually if I then tell Kiki, my wife, what I'm thinking or what my judgment is, she'll usually respond with, you're too hard on your work. But I feel like I'm giving it a fair, stern sort of look as if I were an editor. That's the mindset I'm putting on whenever I'm looking at it at that point. And yeah, I try to learn whatever I can from that. Usually the lesson that I'm learning is on the older work is like, I wish I had more time, obviously, but also like, wow, sometimes I just got really lucky because I didn't actually know the rule, but I happened to be following some of the rules that I now know. But I can look back and I know I didn't know what I was doing there. I just happened to kind of stumble into some storytelling thing that I liked, but it's because I just got lucky. Or that I now know going forward to not feel like I have to draw. Sometimes whenever you're drawing a comic book, like there's a tendency, at least for me, to make sure like every aspect of like a character's anatomy is accounted for in the panel, like to not do like extreme close-ups of just like a close-up of someone's mouth in the foreground. Basically, it's like instead I would have this tendency back in the old days to like draw their entire face, and that's okay sometimes. But if you do that everywhere, then it becomes homogenous. So it's better to vary your shots. Like maybe you just draw the close-up of an eye or the close-up of a mouth, or you probably want to keep it to those two instead of like a close-up of a nostril. That might be strange. But those are the kind of things that I try to evaluate and learn from. Or like back then, I certainly did use this certain angle quite a bit. I need to make sure I'm not relying on that safe angle as much. Like mix it up and do something that's more ambitious.
Okay, I got to ask you about Mamator.
I'm sorry.
I got to ask you about Mamator, the amalgamation of Mumra and Skeletor. Right. Now, when there's something like that, and obviously the script calls for the two characters' power sets to merge because they're losing at this point. We've seen a ditch effort from our heroes now, so now we're seeing our villains step up. As you're looking at that, do they give you guidance as far as, we want it to look like this, we want it to look like that? Do you have a lot of freedom with that? Does it go through a lot of different versions? How does that work? Because I really like the end result was something that I really enjoyed because I didn't see it going there. And I really liked the cliffhangers with this because there were a lot of things that like characters popping up and certain story elements I didn't see coming in the way the cliffhangers went. This was a really good one because I'm like I didn't see the buddy cop system with these two kind of going here, and I liked that it did because I liked the end result. But how did that work?
It was when I was we're always drawing covers like 2 or 3 months in advance because they have to be ready for solicitations. So I was working on the cover of issue 6, maybe whenever I was drawing issue 3. I think that's probably the right time frame, unless it was like when I was wrapping up issue 2, something like that. Basically, Lloyd and Rob had in their description of. It's kind of like they work together with my editors to figure out the type of image that will be needed for the cover for each issue, and then that's conveyed to me, and then I come up with a bunch of rough layouts, and then they pick the one that they like the most, best angle or whatever. Or if like we're trying to keep the reveal of somebody to be very secretive, then we'll pick a more obscure angle, whatever. But the point is with Mummator, that's actually how it's Mummator, not when you said Mummator, I actually thought you were talking about Mater from like Cars. Now, I'm not making fun of you or something.
No. It's good.
Okay. It just caught me off. That's why I said who? Like what is it? But it's not like you would have heard anyone say their name or say Mummator's name or whatever. But it's like, Skeletor. It's right. Basically the last of his name. Anyway, and they just told me, they wanted him to be like 12 to 15 foot tall, an amalgam of both Skeletor and Mumra, and that was pretty much. Oh, and they wanted him to be able to have basically a cape, or they said that they wanted him to have. Maybe they said bandages, like sort of like Mumra's bandages, but it could be. But they wanted the regal look in some panels in issue 6, basically, of him looking like he had a cape. But so it's like separate pieces of cloth that then can kind of hang down as a cape if the situation calls for it or something. So that was about the extent of it, in other words. So, and then from there, it's like I just start looking at visual similarities and try to play those up. And then some of the themes, it's like Skeletor has bones and Mumra has bandages. They both have like sort of mummified, crusty looking, dehydrated faces. So do you go with like the sort of a mummy kind of looks like withered skin versus bone. But if you go too much but I went with the bone direction because I had a lot of Mumra influence already. So you start to vary the influences so that it's not too far in one person's camp or not. That's just the kind of thing. Those are just like design sort of 101 sort of things that you keep in mind as you're working on it. And then after that design got approved, so I worked up like a style guide type thing. It's like I did a brief sketch. They had some notes, but then they liked it, and then I from there did like a more established style guide. They then signed off on it, and then Jeremy over the top of that added a color scheme that they had a couple of different ones to choose from. That's basically the sort of procedure that we went through.
Well, one of those color schemes was Mummator. One of the things that I really liked about that whole sequence is, and I got to step back a little bit now, because you see this sequence where they're using some of their weapons that they've been really crafting since the beginning. They've been working together to try and to enhance and make the weapons work the way that they could. But then we get into this great sequence where you see that the typical chant, the ancient spirits of evil in your final dying thrashes. I really liked how we saw Skeletor come in there. We see all of our heroes kind of seeing this transformation occur before them. I loved the pacing of that in the page before, how we got to see the gradual transformation into the end. And I'd be remiss that last page matters more to me because of the journey to get there. So yay, way cool at the end when you got to finally see the transformation, but equally important to me was the visual transformation along with the text, to see that gradually playing out and the reaction of our characters. We see a lot of different camera angles that I think really added this sense of distance from him to them, and us seeing what it's looking like. It is one of those, bad, cool, magic transformations that just make you go, wow, we're witnessing this type of powerful thing. And it played out very well.
Thanks. And that's an example of the different types of angles that, like in the past, I probably would have used a more conservative set of angles or wouldn't have understood how to kind of create contrast in shapes to try to convey distance as well. Like I wouldn't have understood those as well. And that's something that having the scope of that issue and also hopefully what is my own artistic growth is pushing me towards or making me realize I need to do or something that are less safe or less traditional for the type of stuff I normally do. And then you just learn sort of on the path, but it's the kind of stuff that I could apply to future books if that sort of scale was called for.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the journey. And I think that's one of the things about this book. When the first issue came out and I started reading and getting into this book, I remember when I called Jim and I said, I really want to. I know I'm going to reach out to Freddie and I want to have him come on to talk about this. I really want to talk about this now though because the artwork was very different for me in a good way. I love when I'm surprised. You see something and kind of go, wow, this is just like I expected this, and it just wound up taking me to a whole different level. This book has been that for me. I'm a fan of these properties. I grew up with them. It was one of those things where when I first heard about this, I'm like, I loved the mashup of the whole thing, but it wasn't one of those ones like the Batman Ninja Turtle one. I'm a Batman guy, so having that crossover was one where that naturally went to me. What I loved about this one, I was surprised at how much it so surpassed my expectations. Like I knew it was going to be good and it was going to be something I was going to dig. I didn't expect to be blown away by pages in this and artwork in this. And I just really think it all came together in a way where it's a surprising book. So I encourage people listening to this, if you haven't picked this up, give this a shot because it really was something for me that was the right kind of surprise where I was like, wow, I was in already with the concept and excited for it. To be surprised by it and go, man, this is a whole different level of depth and artistic. It's some of the best artwork I've seen from you. And I really, for me, enjoying the journey that I go on with you as an artist, I like when I'm surprised with that. I'm kind of going, oh, man, dude kicked it up like a notch and a half. And it just like really, so I appreciated the effort to this and how it all paid off for myself as somebody who got to enjoy the experience so far. And I'm glad there's another issue.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's something I've really enjoyed, and it has stretched me considerably, artistically. And I'm glad that it has that. The only way that I'm aware of to give that sort of impact or convey that sort of scale, or hopefully what people might see as epic or especially stuff they haven't seen from me before, is to just pour hours and hours into it and to treat it basically like this is my version of a blockbuster film, to try not to spare no expense meaning time. That's the main thing, is that my main budget, so to speak, is time. And you just, as much as I could, I just poured everything I could into it to try to make it hopefully fulfilling to the people like me who grew up with these franchises. And I mean, if other people get into it, that's awesome. But, the main thing was like this, if these were like characters that I didn't know of or, at all or something, I would be interested if somehow I could look into a parallel universe, if these were characters just that I didn't care about or something, to know how much different this would have been. I'm not sure if it would have had the same feel. I'm talking about the amount of passion and then that keeping me interested to put in the amount of hours and that sort of thing. I really don't know what it would be like, but this was like me trying to provide cool entertainment for my 8-year-old self or something.
Jim, Freddie, guys, I know we discussed a lot, obviously, and obviously, as we usually do, we go off in tangents along the way. But a lot of times when I do that, or when we go off those tangent discussions, there might be something like glossed over or missed that was important to one or both of you. Is there anything that we missed that you really wanted to make sure to discuss, or that was a point that you wanted to make that I left out? And, Jim, I'll obviously go with you first, because if there's a question, obviously we want to get to Freddie, so we can do that. And then Freddie, obviously you, if there's something that we missed that you wanted to discuss.
Cool.
Well, not a question more, is just something else I just noticed right now. That final page with the Mamator and all that, and you see all the characters down there. The Panthro pose that you got going on there, man, that is awesome. He's got the nunchucks ready. He's in battle mode. He's got that I look cool look to him. Outstanding.
Thanks. Yeah, the rest of the issue, he's like fighting these giants, these like kaiju almost, so he's not going to use nunchucks, obviously. But in my mind, what I pictured whenever I was drawing him, because whenever you're drawing them, you have to kind of get in character as them, that I was picturing to myself that he was thinking, okay, finally, Like, now, this is the kind of fight. This is more what he's ready for, what he's prepared for. He's about ready to try to take on Momotor with some nunchucks. That's going to be a hard fight for him, by the way. Issue 6 doesn't start very good for the battlefield here. So slight spoiler there, but that to me is like, he's the only one. Everybody else, there's like, generally speaking, they're like kind of shocked or a little bit angry, and there's a few attorney and guards that actually have them starting to cower. But he's on top of it. He's already got his weapons out. He's ready to fight.
Well, Tex is ready to go too. The twin guns guy. Yeah, because he's right there.
Blast.
He's ready to go, man. Yeah, I was like, after you mentioned him, as we're going through, I'm saying, oh, there he is. Oh, okay, there he is. Because he was just one of those characters that kind of like that had all this. I'm actually going to go back through and read the other issues and see where I can see him in the other issues now, just because you can tell you had some fun with that character.
Yeah, he's only in a few. He's not featured in a lot. He's like at the funeral and whatever. I mean, you'll see him, but he's not in a lot of places because there's some, but there's some parts in the script where basically they literally will write stuff like for 3 or 4 characters to be doing, but then they'll put a note that says, and any other Masters of the Universe you want to include. Like, they'll literally just write that. And so anytime that there was, if I had the opportunity, if it said that, I would usually include him into that because he's just kind of a cool guy. And I really like Clamp Champ is his name. He's the guy with the big old giant, like, weird mechanical hook thing on his arm. He actually looks a lot like Fisto if you just look at their costume elements, but Clamp Champ has the huge clamp on his arm. Cool guy to draw, though.
Freddie, is there anything that we left out that maybe you want to discuss about your experience with this whole project?
I know as soon as we get off that it probably will. I mean, us talking, we've been talking here for a little while, which I've enjoyed, by the way. I mean, we've covered most of it. I guess I would want to reiterate that I know that I'm very lucky to be doing this as my job. So like earlier when I hope that it comes off more as me like explaining and contextualizing the obstacles in the job, because there's stuff to every job that's not desirable, that it doesn't come off as, like you were saying, like the violin thing. I just want to make sure it comes off the correct way to anyone listening as well, that it's just the main obstacle is just the number of hours. However, I totally acknowledge that there are lots of people, lots of comic book artists trying to break in that are super passionate and they're very talented, and they just haven't kind of gotten that break to get in yet. And I'm very lucky that I have had that break and have had a bit of a career thus far, and I hope it continues. I just want to acknowledge that because it's something that I remind myself often and I tell other people, but I want to to counterbalance some of the negatives that I spoke of earlier.
Well, I think every career path has positives and negatives, and I think it's important for people, like, one of the nice things about being able to talk with you frankly about your career, I think you always share your passion and your love for what you do and the product. I mean, especially for anybody who's kind of, I mean, like your visits on our show kind of have their own continuity. I mean, as far as we've kind of gone on a journey together. This is going to be episode 489 for us, so we're 11 away from 500 shows. You've been a big part of that journey with us. So, I mean, in 11 years, you've been on. You may be, if you're not our most frequent guest, you're easily
up there.
You may be our. I mean, certainly the hours you put in with us has been just stellar. So, I mean, we've gotten to know you really well. I'm not just talking about Jim and myself. Our whole listening audience have gotten to know you and seen your passion for what you do in comics and your own experiences and pros and cons. And I think that's important for people who are breaking into the industry or want to break into the industry to know all those pieces, because I think that's a key. We'll use the education example that Jim was talking about earlier. I started off as a teacher. I think, when I first started my job, my first year teaching, there are so many things, pros and cons. It was my chosen career path. I'm very passionate about it. There's pros and cons littered throughout your first year in that, where they didn't stop my drive or my desire to be in education as a career, but there were days where I was like, woof, I didn't see that coming. and part of that journey is learning how to really latch onto the things that bring you to the dance, to help you with the things that are the challenges. So I always appreciate your frank conversation because I learned a lot, and I live through that. It's I'm a big fan of DVD extras and Blu-ray extras and getting to know and director's commentary through film.
Yeah, me too.
And I think one of the nice parts about your journey when you come on, it's kind of the artist commentary as you go through, and you get to know the highlights and the challenges and what that journey's really like for you. And I appreciate that because it makes me respect more the end product we get when I know that how much goes into delivering what I receive each month. It makes me, I think it makes those pages mean more to me as a reader. And I do find that I appreciate my comics more now than I ever have in my life, which is, I think, kind of a cool thing.
Awesome. Yeah, I also really like the DVD extras and commentaries and that sort of thing. Do you pick up like the director's cuts of comic books whenever they I mean, they're not as interactive or as, sort of long form as this, obviously, the podcast, but sometimes it'll describe, there'll be like a notes section. You'll get to see, pencils, just like raw pencils or raw ink sometimes. And then sometimes they'll have like a little aside where they're describing kind of what they were thinking on different books. Have you checked those out as well?
Yes. It tends to, I don't pick up every single one of them, but I pick up quite a few, to be honest, and obviously they're usually books that are my favorites. I wish there were more of them, because I like that kind of delivery, and I like to know. I honestly wish it would be great if there was different methods of delivering those, too. I would love, like, a DVD of like a slideshow of the comic with, maybe some shots of the artist's process, the writer's process, the whole creative team. I know that's a pie-in-the-sky dream, because you're now taking a subset of an audience, trying to make those pieces go out there. But for myself, I would pick that up in an absolute instant. Sequart does every so often these direct interview pieces with creators. I'm a fan of those. I like any opportunity to kind of get to know more about the industry. Not because I'm looking to break into it, because I just, that's never been me. I've always been the fan who just wants to know more. Like, what is it like? How did these things get, from A to B and into my hands? I think it just makes me love the medium even more.
Awesome. Yeah, I wish that they were also, and like what you were saying, like a subset or a niche sort of audience has to be subdivided even further. That's sort of the market for the director's cuts and that sort of thing. It would be nice if, like, digital comics did something like that, where, I actually don't know how they would do it. I don't know anything about the programming, but something that would show, you could kind of peel away the layers of production, where you could look at the comic book without lettering or without color. You know what I mean? Like, you could click different options or something to see that. I don't know. Or I actually don't even know if they do that. Maybe they already do that. I'm not sure. But because I always pick up, I get comic books in paper. So I'm one of the quaint people who just buy, get them in paper only. So
Valiant did that with some of their books, where you would get the issue and you'd read it through, but then the rest of the book in the back, there was black and whites of certain pages, or originally it was almost the whole issue, if not the whole issue. I have to go back and look at my digitals of it, but that was, if you bought the digital issue, you had that piece, which I quite appreciated, and you actually added another layer to it. It'd be great to be able to click and have the ability to take out and put in the lettering, take out and put in the coloring, to take it down to the different layers. I would love that. I think that would be a pure geek out. And maybe to have a digital code. I'd like to see more digital codes, I think, in the paper copy, where your fans, you want to be able to smell the paper smell and all that, because I fall into that category too. But then I like being able to, on my iPad, have a collection of comics on there that I can read and be able to enjoy when I want to as well, and zoom in. I like, with the iPad, being able to use my my fingers to zoom in and out of the art and see it a little bit bigger. Yeah. Because I'm a fan of things like the Absolute editions, because of the fact that you get to see the details in some of the art and some of the small pieces that are put in the background as like a surprise item that you can't see otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a big benefit of that, because, like, you could do the manual zoom, but it's on a piece of paper, which is to say get your eye just closer to it. But then there's like limitations of printing and that sort of thing. So you'll start seeing individual dots. If you're looking really close, you'll just see like individual dots of the printing dots and stuff, especially if the book is a little bit older, because before they came out with stochastic printing, I think is what it's called. There's nothing else. I think that's pretty much it as far as stuff that I wanted to cover and stuff, and to thank anyone who has checked out the series. And I hope that there should be a pretty juicy, eventually when there is a trade, I don't know when exactly that'll be, but I did quite a bit of sketch, like preparative sort of sketch work for the series. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to include all of that in the trade, so that hopefully will be an incentive if anyone, I like trades quite a bit and pick them up more than the individual floppies. So hopefully that would give people an incentive to check that out.
I really like when they do that in collected editions, trades, hardcovers, things like that. The extra bonuses. It's a difference between me sometimes picking up, because I do find myself, Jim and I were talking recently on an episode of the podcast where, because of the digital immediacy now, because we get a lot of our comics mailed to us through our DCB service, our sponsor, so we get our paper copies that way. Sometimes on Wednesday when the digitals come out, that's my newsstand, being able to kind of go through and go, oh, my favorite books. So like this whole series I've got digitally as well as paper copies, because of the fact that I'm really enjoying it. And I do that with my favorites where I've got both. So when it comes to trades and collected editions, a lot of them, because I've purchased them twice already, a lot of my favorites, it's like going for that third purchase has got to be like, I want an Absolute edition, I want a hardcover, I want a trade, but I want it to have extras. I like those bonuses. I really appreciate when that archived material is in there, because that's an incentive for me not only to have it as a nice, neat, collected copy, but also just I like to see some of that behind-the-scenes stuff. I think it's a nice treat. I appreciate the extra bonuses, and it does make the difference between me saying I'm happy with my singles or I really want that nice collected volume with the extra features.
Yeah, what is up with that? I have seen, first of all, I agree with you, but I have seen trades that have basically nothing in the back. If I were somebody who had purchased the individual issues, it would bug me quite a bit there's no incentive. What is the incentive other than it just being bound together? I guess that's the incentive maybe. But anyway, I mean, I'm not naming names, but there's a specific series of trades that I'm like thinking of right now with all of my frustration that is like, why don't they include a bunch of prep work stuff in it? I mean, I know it's a higher page count and stuff, but I think it would probably garner them more sales, whatever. I just like seeing that stuff.
I do too, and I think it's a normal expectation nowadays. I think some of it's price point of the trade. I think that happens with trades more than hardcovers. Hardcovers, I almost think it's inexcusable, because the hardcovers typically are a premium price point anyway, because you're getting that bound piece. So I would like extras in that. And don't get me wrong, if it's a favorite series and I want it in hardcover, I'm picking it up in hardcover regardless of the extras. Yeah. But I do think that I know for myself, extras do make it an added value, and they do when there's like a volume 2 or a volume 3. They make the difference between me continuing to purchase those and not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Freddie, as always, you gave us a ton of your time, and you mentioned earlier enjoying the conversation. We greatly enjoy talking to you. I mean, it's honestly one of the things I most look forward to is the opportunity to sit down and really chat with you, not only because I really enjoy your work, but your insight and your honesty. I think our listening audience, has gotten to really know you as a creator and your process all the way through. I think it's been a great journey we've gone on together. And as we're hitting 11 years and 500 episodes of the show, I not only want to thank you for this episode, but just the friendship that you've shown us and our listening audience over the years. We really appreciate it. And you've been a huge part of what's made this podcast fun for us to keep doing. And I look forward to continuing this relationship moving forward and just enjoying having you on and enjoying your work. So thank you again for your time.
My pleasure. It's really enjoyable to me, and I'm glad to be involved.
One other piece I do want to say for our fans, Freddie, people want to find you. Where should they be looking?
My main social media would be like Facebook, which is, I think everything is Freddie Art, or just look for Freddie Williams. Anyway, it's or Freddie Williams II is what you'd find me under. But so Facebook. On Twitter and Instagram, I'm Freddie Art. I believe I'm that on Tumblr as well. And those are the main social media that I that I frequent. But I have a lot of stuff on my website, which is freddieart.com. That's where I would advise most people to go. It has links for all those different social media, so freddieart.com. I also have a YouTube channel, although I haven't updated anything for a while, but I've got like some old Q&A videos and that sort of thing about how to break into the industry, but they're a little old, but it's still good information. That's why I still leave them up there, even though I look completely different, like a completely different person now. Yeah, freddieart.com would be the best place.
Yeah, always there's links in the show notes. So anybody listening, if you forget any of that, please look into our show notes. They're always available on our website, but also within the notes of the podcast. So feel free to click on it that way. It's usually an easy way to get to it and then bookmark it, and then you're a part of all that. Freddie, as I said before, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Really great to talk to you about this book. And for anybody listening, if you haven't picked it up, He-Man Thundercats, get out there and grab it. It's so easy to grab these things nowadays, and let your comic shop know that you want to be reading this material.
Thank you guys very much. It's my pleasure.
He is called Hawkman. His gauntlets possess awesome powers.
I want to remind everyone about our website, ragingbullets.com. Ragingbullets.com is where you're going to find out information about the show episodes. I post up there as there's updates as far as when episodes are going to be released, especially right now with the fact, as I mentioned, that I'm taking class. It's a great way to find out when our new shows are coming out. Thank you again to our listening audience for being so supportive. We really appreciate you. We want to remind everybody about our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434. Or Dr. Norge on Skype. It's always available in the show notes, always available on the website. We love having you a part of the show. There's actually a voicemail sitting in the queue. It will be on our next episode. It's on there as of when we're recording the opening and closing of this episode. So we will have it on to our next show. And really appreciate you being a part of it. We are on Google. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. On the PlayStation Network, Raging_Bullets. So you can find us anywhere that you are at. Speaking of Facebook, we have a Facebook fan page, but we also have a Facebook group community. And it is such a great community. I call it ours, but it's a true community in the sense that the inmates are running the asylum. And I actually like that. I am so proud of Jeremy and all the people there. And this is not diminishing Jeremy's role at all. I always feel bad when I say just Jeremy's name, because Jeremy obviously has been our moderator over there and has just done such a great job of running it and making it really a place that is a true community. That's why when I say Jeremy and everybody, I do genuinely mean everybody there. It's their place. I love that it grew beyond our show, and I really do consider that something that's grown well beyond our show. It's their own community. It's more that I'm proud to be associated with it and all the people there. I pop in to check out news and commentary that people are having there. To me, it's kind of my own little escape. It's sometimes my way to keep up to date, just because people are so on top of things with new releases of books, thoughts on recent news that's come out. They'll do like watch-alongs with various TV shows that I think are really great as well. They'll talk about video games, pop culture. People will shout out podcast blogs, different things like that are out there. I just think it's really just a great community. So thank you to Jeremy. Thank you to everybody who participates there. It's nice to see a group of people that are just not afraid to be fans. And that's what that group is. It's not this snarky, for lack of a better term, bitchy group. They're really the kind of fans that I wish these are people that I could see regularly and meet and shake their hands. And I do hope so many people on there that I do get to meet you at some point, because I really do feel like we're all friends. And that's just says a lot to the quality of the people that are there. So I shout out that group often. And the reason why I do it is if you haven't checked it out and you're not a Facebook group community fan, you might want to check this one out, because I think it's a special group and it's worth being a part of. Once again, sponsoring is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, remember it's the time of the month to check out the new deals, up to 75% off of your favorite comics. They have bundles at 50% off that are amazing. They have all kinds of deals on statues and toys and everything that really is comic swag that you would want to pick up on, DVDs, Blu-rays, stuff like that. You're all going to want to get them from DCBService.com. It's a great way to support our show sponsor. Remember to link your digital accounts to save 5% on those purchases. And then make sure to check out InStockTrades.com. Over at InStockTrades.com, it's a great way to find out where you can get some of Freddie E. Williams II's great work. They also have on there, this is really cool, I just saw this, Justice League Suicide Squad number 1, the DCB Service Variant Edition by Jose Luis, the cover by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, is $3.99 over there. You can grab it. If you missed it, it's a great way to catch that particular variant issue. That's an amazing artist and a great way to get that cover. So I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Mr. Segulin, our next episode, we have some really cool things we want to discuss, some books that you and I are into. We previously bumped Green Arrow from an episode. We're going to talk about Green Arrow, but we're also going to talk about some brand new books. We're going to talk about The Wildstorm. We are going to talk about Super Sons, and we are also going to talk about Batwoman. I almost said Batwoman Begins. Batwoman Rebirth, we're going to be talking about. I literally almost said Batwoman Begins, but it really is. That's actually thematically, having read the issue now, it's not so off on that one. Batwoman Rebirth we're also going to be discussing. So we will see you our next episode.
Bye!
On November 13th, Sean Whalen was asked to stop constantly talking about comic books. That request came from his wife. Deep down, he knew she was right, but he also knew that someday he would find someone that would talk to him. With nowhere else to go, he appeared at the home of his childhood friend Jim Segulin. Sometime earlier, Segulin's boss had requested that he shut up about his comic books and never speak of them again. Can two grown men put out a DC Comics podcast without driving each other crazy? It's Raging Bullets, the DC Comics fan podcast. With Sean Whalen as Dr. Norge, and Jim Segulin as the Sensei of the Whatnot and the Duke of You-Know. It's a spoiler podcast, so they will go in depth into the plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the comics they are reviewing. So if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you may better enjoy the show.